An arrogant knight in a traveling cloak boasted before three young women, claiming he sought to mentor someone while declaring himself the grandest warrior alive. Before he could even finish his boastful declaration, a single, devastating strike sent the self-proclaimed champion crashing through a solid stone cliff face, leaving onlookers in utter shock. The women responsible stood utterly unfazed. Rion, the Dragon King warlord, lamented that she had not even been given a proper chance to teach him a lesson, while Livadmala, the high elf arch-wizard, stood composed by her side. Joining them was Telomia, the apocalyptic heretical cleric, who dismissively brushed off the defeated warrior as yet another unqualified fool. Together, the three represented an unmatched trio of legendary power. Known throughout the realm as walking natural disasters, each possessed catastrophic strength, one capable of shattering mountains with her fists, another able to annihilate entire armies with a single spell, and the third possessing lethal reverse recovery magic. Yet, despite their immense beauty and peerless strength, a bystander dared to inquire why three such extraordinary women had not found everything their hearts desired, prompting an ominous silence. The harsh reality was that none of them could manage to secure a suitable romantic partner, and when the bystander foolishly pointed out their lack of experience, he was instantly blasted away. Reflecting on their dilemma, they lamented that every man they encountered suffered from weak capabilities and unbearable arrogance, while their own exceptionally high standards demanded a partner who was at least their equal in power. As they bickered over their refusal to compromise, a sudden and game-changing revelation struck them all at once. If a worthy man could not be found, they would simply have to raise one themselves. She declared with sharp conviction that raising a promising young youth from scratch was their most viable option. Her elf companion reluctantly agreed, acknowledging their utter lack of romantic experience, while their vampire ally reasoned that cultivating an ideal partner directly was far more efficient than searching for someone who might not even exist. With their shared goal established, the three formidable masters embarked on a sweeping search across the continent, determined to locate a potential disciple who could one day become a worthy husband. Months passed without a single suitable candidate revealing himself. As they rested at a sunlit terrace, the elven wizard cautioned that seasoned warriors lacked potential for growth, while the dragon leader insisted they simply needed to recruit a promising young fighter with potential. Nearby patrons began discussing rumors of a legendary hero's descendant enrolling at the famed academy in Baskrabia, capturing the women's attention. The patrons elaborated on how established families traditionally sent prospective adventurers to such institutions to forge alliances and secure formidable partners for the future. A sudden revelation struck the three masters. Realizing the academy was essentially a gathering ground for the world's finest young talents, their eyes widened with newfound resolve. Springing into action, the dragon leader proclaimed that they would claim either the hero's descendant or one of his rivals as their disciple, recalling that she even knew the institution's dean personally. Without losing another moment, they tore through the skies toward their new destination. High above the realm stood the fortified city of Baskrabia, a legendary haven for adventurers situated near the world's largest reservoir of magical power and home to its most prestigious academy. The city streets buzzed with festive energy as townspeople gathered for the annual Good Harvest Festival and the upcoming profession ceremony in the central amphitheater. A sudden, heavy crash echoes near the academy grounds as a stone wall cracks and crumbles under immense physical force. At the Royal Adventurers School of Armeria, Dean Suyera Kutkajaw peers out the window in complete disbelief, sweating profusely upon realizing that the three legendary S-class figures have arrived at the academy. Rushing down the hallway, he frantically asks a hooded subordinate if the intruders could merely be imposters using fake titles. The aide grimly clarifies that their overwhelming aura is unmistakable, confirming the return of the real S-class masterminds. Fuming with anger and distress, he learns that the three uninvited guests are already inside his office, casually making themselves at home and eating tea cakes without permission. Overwhelmed by the chaotic timing right before the Good Harvest Festival, he desperately commands the assistant to make up an excuse and get them out. Clutching his throbbing head in sheer exhaustion, he instructs the aide to tell the visitors he will arrive in 30 minutes. Before facing them, the severely stressed administrator frantically demands tranquilizers and stomachache recovery magic to soothe the agonizing ulcers caused by their arrival. Attempting to resolve routine duties first, he sternly informs a pleading student that the decision to expel them is final and cannot be reversed. Yet beneath his harsh authority, he continues to mentally panic and struggle to prepare himself for the confrontation ahead. Walking toward his office doors, he desperately prays to the gods that the entire situation was a mistake and that the intruders have departed. But as he opens the door, his hopes are crushed upon finding the three women comfortably lounging on his furniture, having eaten all his tea snacks. As he stands stunned at the entrance, the three women nonchalantly chastise him for making them wait so long, boldly bringing up how much assistance they had provided him in the past rather than apologizing for breaking into his workplace. Exasperated by their audacity, he angrily shouts back, reminding them that while they have helped before, their actions always result in catastrophic destruction that his guild is forced to clean up. He asserts that with the busy Good Harvest Festival and the enrollment of the hero's descendant requiring his full attention, he has no time to entertain them. Hearing him inadvertently reveal his priorities, she flashes a cunning smile and immediately zeroes in on their primary objective, demanding that he turn over the descendant of the hero without delay. She sat comfortably alongside her companions as the high elf wizard laid out their intentions, explaining that they plan to oversee the training of the incoming hero should the youth display sufficient potential. Hearing this outrageous proposal, the dean could barely contain his disbelief, inwardly questioning if these notorious, self-centered figures were truly capable of teaching anyone. Undeterred by his obvious skepticism, the elf calmly requested an immediate audience with the recruit. When the dragon warlord offered a sweet smile and claimed they merely wanted to raise the hero properly, the administrator inwardly screamed in denial. He knew all too well that behind their pleasant words lay chaotic personalities that would disobey any authority for their own whims. Overwhelmed by intense dread, he resolved to keep the hero hidden at all costs, terrified that allowing these powerhouses access to humanity's greatest trump card would spell absolute ruin for the world. His sudden, tense silence did not go unnoticed by the sharp-eyed masters. While he silently plotted to feign ignorance and buy time, the trio nonchalantly brainstormed methods to coerce him, casually debating whether to threaten his personal belongings, his high-grade gear, or take hostages. Before their subtle extortion could escalate, a violent blast tore through the mountain backdrop, echoing with deafening force right outside the window. The sudden shockwave vibrated through the grand office, instantly shattering the tense negotiation and forcing everyone to look out toward the city in bewilderment. Across the sprawling cityscape of Armeria, heavy tremors rattled the majestic spires as clouds of dust billowed into the sky. Down in the academy thoroughfares, panic seized the students and citizens as stone towers cracked and collapsed into the crowded streets. Far beyond the city perimeters, gigantic, abyssal tendrils burst forth from the shattered earth, roaring as they loomed over the landscape. A colossal monstrosity, a danger class 8 poison slime hydra, suddenly rises above the city skyline, its immense, dark tentacles towering over the surrounding architecture with a terrifying roar. Thrashing wildly through the narrow avenues, the immense beast crushes stone and mortar, sending terrified citizens fleeing for their lives as chaos engulfs the district. Adjusting his glasses in utter disbelief, the administrator realizes the scale of the threat normally requiring an entire national army, while the fiery leader panics at the thought of losing all their potential husband candidates to the beast. Driven by desperation, the formidable trio leaps into action together, diving straight toward the creature from the rooftops above at blinding speed. Coughing through the dust stirred up by the commotion below, he looks on with a mix of frustration and disbelief at their reckless intervention. High above the battlefield, the elven mage begins weaving the highest rank of ice magic, surrounding the titan in an agonizing frost that shocks the onlookers below. Invoking her spell, Absolute Zero, she encases the massive hydra in solid, jagged pillars of ice, completely freezing the rampaging creature in midair. Taking advantage of the monster's immobilization, the dragon warrior charges ahead with a battle cry, descending upon the frozen Leviathan like a meteor alongside her allies. A devastating impact shatters the creature upon the cobblestone streets, unleashing a violent shockwave that rattles the surrounding buildings. The force of the explosion knocks several nearby candidates off their feet, leaving them grumbling amidst the smoking rubble as they try to regain their composure. As the battle raged, the Ice Mage realized the Hydra possessed far greater magic resistance than anticipated. Merely freezing its surface would not destroy the creature's core, especially with its uncanny recovery speed continuously mending the damage. Swooping through the air above the massive beast, the Dragon Warrior received a stern warning about the monster's lethal, acidic venom, capable of melting an ordinary citizen with just a few stray drops. She acknowledged the danger with a confident grin, well aware of the high stakes. Calling out to their dark companion, they questioned whether her debilitating abilities could reach the creature from such a distance. Though uncertain if her curses could overcome the beast's rapid regeneration, the young cleric agreed that unleashing her full power was their best option. Dropping straight toward the murky waters below, she executed a flawless landing right beside the thrashing beast, positioning herself at point-blank range. Without hesitation, she unleashed the full fury of her vexing skills, causing dark, volatile spheres of cursed energy to erupt and bubble all around her targets. The combined onslaught hit home, causing the massive Hydra to writhe and screech in agony as their coordinated assault finally broke through its formidable defenses. Meanwhile, inside the Academy corridors, the Dean sprinted toward the combat zone, weighing the situation in his mind. He knew that while the three heroines were strong enough to defeat high-tier threats, minimizing civilian casualties in a crowded city made the battle far more treacherous. As he moved to rally the Academy's faculty to contain the collateral damage, an anxious staff member burst into his path, desperately attempting to report a grave development. When the administrator tried to direct them toward the Hydra, the staff member urgently cut him off, revealing that the true crisis was something else entirely. Unfurling an official report, the staff member delivered catastrophic news. A massive monster stampede of over 4,000 beasts was hurtling toward the city from the abyssal sea of trees just to the north. As he digested the terrifying news, a massive horde of over 4,000 monsters surged forth from the forest, their thunderous footsteps shaking the earth as they charged directly toward the vulnerable city. His panic mounted as he cursed the observation team for failing to detect the incoming threat, exasperated that a sudden stampede was occurring right in the middle of the Good Harvest Festival and the Hydra crisis. Recognizing the dire necessity, he immediately commanded that all B-class adventurers deploy north to meet the stampede, while lower ranks assisted with civilian evacuations, leaving the Hydra in the hands of the elite S-class team. Meanwhile, at the battlefield, the hero launched a fierce assault against the Hydra, channeling a multi-elemental spell of 4 distinct bullets aimed straight at the monstrous beast. The powerful spell detonated against the creature with massive force, illuminating the sky above the district as Telomia watched from below, her eyes widening at the destructive display. Through the translucent, thrashing tissue of the Hydra, its glowing core pulsated loudly, revealing its hidden location deep within the beast's neck. An enormous sphere of magic swelled in the air above the town, casting a blinding radiance over the surrounding buildings as energy mounted. Observing the core's irregular position, she noted with mild dismay that it had manifested in an inconvenient spot rather than near the surface, presenting a serious tactical complication. Weighing their remaining options, the High Elf wizard realized the delicate balance of their fight, noting that Rion could not abandon her post distracting the neck, while Telomia's passage inside would risk shattering the crucial ice keeping the beast contained. Breaking the deadlock, the energetic hero leaped into the air and shouted down to the adventurers on the ground, instructing someone to strike the exposed core with a blade while the team held the Hydra at bay. Before anyone could strike, a gargantuan, intricate magic circle erupted across the sky above the Hydra, instantly imposing a devastating area-wide curse that plunged every adventurer's attributes to their absolute lowest. She stumbled under the sudden weight of the debilitating curse, looking on in dread as the surrounding fighters collapsed into panic. Before anyone could recover, the towering poison slime Hydra unleashed a deafening, high-level roar that echoed across the plaza. High above the chaos, a brave warrior plunged down from the rooftops with her cloak billowing violently against the sky. Steel-eyed and determined, she prepared to take control of the desperate engagement. Descending past the stone buildings, her dramatic arrival caught the townspeople off guard as they wondered if she was one of the dean's elite reinforcements. Landing cleanly, she readied her weapon to unleash her technique. In a flashing whirlwind of motion, her broadsword released a storm of relentless strikes, severing the monster's tentacles with boundless slashes of dust. However, before her victory could be sealed, sneaky tendrils burst from the slime and bound her tightly in midair, eliciting cries of agony from her and terror from the onlookers. As the writhing tendrils held her immobilized, the surrounding allies stared up in stunned silence, their eyes wide with shock as they finally caught sight of her face. The truth defied all expectations. The legendary champion sent to save them was merely a young girl. Noting her exquisite fine armor and the royal crest emblazoned upon it, they struggled to comprehend how someone so young possessed such extraordinary power. Meanwhile, the dragon warlord screamed in frustration as the magical debuff completely drained her strength, leaving her barely able to stand beneath the gloomy sky. Weakened and trembling on the cobblestones, the young hero dragged her heavy blade with faint groans, while her companions pondered whether they should break protocol to force a way forward. Just as Rion scanned the massive creature for another vulnerable point, a figure suddenly sprinted past them, charging recklessly directly toward the glowing central core of the Hydra. Her eyes widened in utter disbelief as she watched the figure sprint toward the monster, realizing with mounting horror that the reckless intruder was merely a 14-year-old human boy whose status revealed 0 skills and 0 stats across the board. Ignoring the sheer impossibility of his survival, the boy charged headlong into battle with sword in hand, leaving the stunned party members gasping in horror as they watched a child with literally 0 status take on a threat that had paralyzed them all. An inspection of the boy's status screen reveals an astonishing truth. Every single attribute, strength, defense, agility, and magic, is at absolute 0. To the onlookers, it seems impossible that a 14-year-old human without a class or skills could survive even a moment on this chaotic battlefield. Shocked by his non-existent stats, Elru cries out in disbelief, fearing the youth will be instantly slain. However, Telawea notices that the slime hydra's fragile core has been exposed, realizing that even someone as weak as him could destroy it. With renewed urgency, she orders her allies to protect the boy with everything they have. Recognizing that this moment presents their only chance to slay the beast without casualties, the boy charges headlong toward the towering monster. As he sprints through the chaos, massive tentacles lash out, sending him tumbling onto his hands and knees just inches away from the creature's exposed flower-like core. Before the deadly appendages can strike, a brilliant cascade of spell fire and freezing ice shatters the surrounding tendrils, clearing a direct path for him to strike. With their eyes locked in absolute determination, both Cross and his allies commit every ounce of their willpower to this final, decisive gambit. As the thrashing beast lets out a deafening roar, the warrior women unleash a fierce counterattack to silence the monster, keeping its focus firmly away from the young boy on the ground. A massive barrage of high-tier ice shards and raw magic impacts the creature with incredible violence, forcing back its tendrils and shielding the young fighter from a lethal counterstrike. Watching from the ground below, an injured ally gazes in awe at the young boy who now stands alone before the colossal, glowing core of the Hydra, ready to deliver the final strike. He strained forward with single-minded focus, even as his companions lay collapsed on the stone floor, their bodies paralyzed by the monster's deafening roars. Gasping heavily for air, the boy pressed on toward the towering threat, forcing his exhausted legs across the paved courtyard with his blade held ready. Spotting the glowing, vulnerable core hovering before him, his momentum was suddenly interrupted as a sharp pain shot through his body and an arm of slime wrapped around him. Bound tightly by the thrashing tendril, he refused to yield, letting out a furious roar of defiance that echoed over the battlefield. Harnessing every remaining drop of strength, he unleashed a massive, sweeping strike that cleaved straight through the monster's core, causing the beast to shriek in agony. Instantly, the severe pressure released as the grasping tendrils snapped, melted, and liquefied, dissolving into harmless slush around him. Watching from below, the rest of the party braced themselves as the massive structure above began to fragment and break apart. A colossal pillar of light and debris erupted skyward, signaling the absolute collapse of the slime hydra over the town. As the magical fallout subsided, the exhausted young warrior collapsed face first onto the cobblestones, prompting his allies to leap down toward him in panic. Reaching his motionless body, Telawea urgently called out to ensure he was alive, calling upon Elru to cast healing magic immediately. He lay broken on the shattered stone, his body ravaged by the battle, as the saintess channeled her radiant healing light into his chest. Leaning over him, the Dragonkin warrior urged him to endure, reassuring him that because the frozen tendrils had kept the lethal poison from spreading, the holy magic could still restore him. His eyes flickered open for a fleeting instant, his barely audible voice rasping out a single question regarding the hero's safety before losing consciousness once more. The warrior stared in utter disbelief that even at death's door, his primary concern was the well-being of another. Nearby, the young hero stood alone amid the ruined wasteland, trembling as the weight of her helplessness crashed down upon her. Approaching the group with hesitation, she quietly inquired if the wounded youth had been acting as their escort, only to receive a somber confirmation while the boy whispered a final sigh of relief before slipping completely into darkness. Overcome with remorse, she sank to her knees before them, bowing her head deeply as she offered a tearful apology for the carelessness that had led to such severe sacrifices. As she knelt in shame, the Dragonkin looked upon the scene with quiet astonishment, realizing the immense lengths to which a level 0 youth had gone simply to protect the hero. Looking down at his fragile form, each of the companions pondered his sheer recklessness. Despite lacking any status, he had cast his own life aside without hesitation, sparking an unyielding desire within the mage to personally train such an absurdly brave child. Suddenly, a dark, mysterious voice echoed across the quiet area, startling the party as it declared that it had finally found its target. Far above the ruined landscape, the sun began its slow descent over the sprawling, ancient territory, casting long shadows across the battered domain. Deep within the unconscious boy's soul, an entity stirred in a dark, bubbling void, disgusted by his total lack of talent, yet resolving that if he possessed no foundation, one would simply have to be forged from scratch. He snapped his eyes open, abruptly awakening from his unconscious state as clarity flooded back into his mind. Sitting up in bed, he found himself resting inside an unfamiliar room, where a familiar warrior sat waiting at his bedside with a look of relief. Leaning in astonishingly close, she formally introduced herself as an S-class Dragonian adventurer, leaving him flustered by both her proximity and her staggering rank. Handing over her official status plate, she confirmed her elite status among the strongest combatants in the world, leaving him entirely speechless as he stared at the credentials. Panicking at the idea of such an elite figure tending to someone as powerless as himself, he urgently inquired about the state of the city after the terrible battle. She motioned toward the window, explaining that they had transferred him to their former operational base in Basque Rubia because the local church was completely overwhelmed with wounded victims. Addressing his worries about mass casualties, she clarified that major structural damage was virtually non-existent since the fight occurred in a redevelopment zone, though low-rank demon stampedes had caused widespread panic and injuries. She reassured him that everyday life was already returning to normal, emphasizing that the body count remained low primarily because he had boldly put his life on the line to hold the threat at bay. Looking away with a mixture of guilt and modesty, he admitted that his actions were not born of bravery, but of desperate panic before stronger allies arrived to take over. Resting her hand gently atop his head, she brushed aside his self-doubt, affirming that regardless of his lack of numerical stats, his decision to stand and fight had saved countless lives. He watched in bewilderment as the Dragonkin warrior suddenly lost her cool, turning red with embarrassment after blurting out such a heartfelt declaration. Leaning in closer, she put aside her embarrassment to make a direct proposal, offering to take him on as her apprentice since he had been expelled from school and had nowhere else to turn. The sudden offer left him utterly speechless, causing her to get even more flustered as she blurted out a demand for him to join her. He could hardly grasp the reality of the situation, stunned that a legendary S-class adventurer would offer an apprenticeship to someone whose stats were all 0 and who had been cast out as incompetent. As she pouted self-consciously, he pinched himself in disbelief, convinced that such an extraordinary turn of events had to be a dream or an illusion experienced in the afterlife after his encounter with the Hydra. Before he could process the offer, the room's entrance was dramatically shattered by rival high-ranking adventurers who accused her of trying to sneakily claim the boy for herself. The newly arrived powerhouses immediately began pitching their own credentials, boasting titles like High-End Dark Priest and High Elf Arc Wizard of Disaster, leaving the youth utterly overwhelmed by their frantic battle for his tutelage. A chaotic shouting match erupted across the room as the formidable women bickered over who held the right to train him, their tempers flaring in fierce competition. Their bickering rapidly escalated into a clash of magical aura so immense that shockwaves rippled through the entire city, triggering what felt like a catastrophic earthquake that terrified the townspeople and horrified the bedridden youth. Fearing that their squabble would level the entire safe house and the town with it, he threw his hands into the air and frantically suggested becoming the apprentice to all of them at once. He could only stare blankly as the three powerful women suddenly began contemplating his proposal. Rather than fighting over him, they began considering the unique benefits of raising a single prodigy together, musing that competing for his ultimate devotion once he matured might actually be the most rewarding outcome. With their agreement swiftly formed, the ladies cheerfully declared that from this day forward, he was officially their joint apprentice. While they exchanged nervous giggles about the unprecedented arrangement, he remained frozen in sheer disbelief. Struggling to process the overwhelming reality, the young boy stammered in complete shock, barely able to voice his amazement at becoming the personal disciple of 3 legendary S-rank adventurers at once. Gathering every ounce of his courage, he stood tall before his formidable new masters and shouted his full name, age, and humble status as a classless youth, officially introducing himself to the trio. As his earnest words of dedication echoed out into the quiet town, he humbly pledged to give his absolute best despite his lack of obvious talent, remaining completely unaware of the daunting reality that he would now have to surpass all 3 masters combined to win any of their heart. Having been expelled from the adventurer school and leaving the orphanage behind, Cross unexpectedly found himself taken in as an apprentice by 3 legendary S-class adventurers. With his living arrangements quickly settled, he psychs himself up in the hallway, taking his first confident steps toward his new training regime. He stands before a stark reality. His recorded status displays absolute 0 across every attribute, a 14-year-old human categorized as jobless, completely devoid of combat stats, magic capabilities, or specialized skills. Stepping out onto the sprawling estate grounds, he gazes up in awe at the massive, castle-like mansion his new mentors acquired under the guise of establishing a simple training base. Near the front entrance, the mentors engage in spirited banter. Rion insists she is only present to keep an eye on things, while Telawea steps forward enthusiastically to claim the right of leading his initial training. Taking charge as his primary instructor, she approaches with a cheerful smile to put him at ease. As he nervously promises to give his all, she reassures him not to be overly stiff, even teasingly offering to boost his growth with secret dragonkin methods if standard training falls short. As the women casually banter about ancient sacred lands, grand treasures, and keeping his power secret before it leaks to the world, he forces an anxious smile, inwardly pleading that their extreme talk is nothing more than a joke. Their booming laughter echoes across the courtyard as they prepare to get down to business, leaving him sweating nervously as he desperately hopes their wild declarations were purely playful banter. Moving to the open training yard, he swings his sword with all his might, shouting with every strike. Observing his frantic movements from afar, the mentors note how thoroughly his former school crushed his spirit, leaving his sword drive severely weakened and atrophied. Closing the distance, Telawea points directly at his face and pinpoints the root of his struggle. Years of being labeled weak conditioned his mind to subconsciously fear counterattacks, locking him in hesitation. She firmly declares that they will tear down those mental blocks and rebuild his training entirely from ground zero. She understood that his deep-seated hesitation stemmed from years of childhood ridicule, back when he was 14 and mocked by other boys for being stuck at level 1 and losing physical contests to younger children despite his endless practice. Seeking to prove his detractors wrong, he had awaited his official evaluation, only for the Academy administrators to examine his record with grave concern. The official record rendered an unforgiving judgment. His class was designated as jobless, and his total count of learned skills remained at absolute zero. As the result was displayed, murmurs of astonishment rippled through the surrounding crowd, with onlookers expressing disbelief at witnessing someone with no skills and zero-level progression. Desperate to avoid being cast out, he had begged the Academy Dean for another chance, but she firmly advised him to abandon adventuring altogether, warning that entering combat without a class was suicidal. Bringing his mind back to the present, he admitted that those harsh words had crushed his resolve, though his mentor pointed out that this lingering trauma was creating a vicious cycle of atrophy. Determined to break this mental barrier, the Dragonkin warrior tossed her practice blade aside, declaring that conventional sword drills were useless if he remained terrified of close-quarters combat. Striking a dynamic stance, she announced that his immediate target was to learn to enjoy fighting, recalling how fearlessly he had lunged at a deadly hydra when driven purely by instinct. Pointed directly at him, she ordered him to begin the first stage of his training by attacking her with all his strength, catching him completely off guard. Looking closer at his weapon, he panicked upon realizing he had been handed a lethal, live blade rather than a dull practice sword, while she casually dismissed the danger. He cried out in protest, clarifying that his hesitation wasn't out of weakness, but genuine concern for her safety. Realizing he was worried about injuring her, she grinned and nonchalantly called up toward the estate windows to arrange a demonstration. Calling up to the mansion balcony, she playfully demanded a direct hit from a high-level spell. From the upper floor, her companion chuckled at the boy's gentleness, calling his reluctance beyond naive for a warrior. Despite her mild annoyance at being interrupted during her prep work, the spellcaster obliged, unleashing an advanced earth magic spell known as Edge Stone that summoned a massive, razor-sharp spire of rock high above the courtyard. The massive monolithic stone plummeted into the training grounds with catastrophic force, obliterating the ground and erupting into a violent storm of dust and shattered bedrock. He cowered in utter disbelief as the shockwave washed over him, while the onlookers merely shielded their eyes from the blowing grit without a trace of panic. Panic overtook him as he screamed out, convinced the catastrophic impact had ended her life, only for the others to casually explain that the estate was protected by soundproofing wards and this was routine. As the dust cloud parted, she emerged completely unscathed amidst the cratered ruin, flashing a broad smile and reassuring him that a simple steel blade could never hope to pierce her skin. Gesturing to her unharmed body, she insisted that even a full-force strike from a real sword would leave her entirely intact, urging him to cast aside his fears. Crossing her arms with absolute confidence, she urged him to attack without restraint, explaining that striking an unarmed, higher-ranked warrior in a one-sided beatdown would purge any lingering reluctance from his heart once and for all. Driven to his limit, he unleashed a barrage of furious sword strikes against her body. Yet his blade bounced off harmlessly as she cheered him on, demanding more speed, power, and genuine killing intent in every swing. He gasped in shock as a sudden wave of restorative energy washed over him, completely refreshing his depleted body and spirit. Rion and Elru had pooled their high-level support abilities, transferring stamina and willpower directly to him, leaving the young boy entirely bewildered by the instantaneous, full-scale recovery. Following the sudden surge of energy, Telawea handed him a canteen of water and some rations, gently reminding him that training was meant to be enjoyable and that pushing himself past his limits without proper rest would yield no real progress. As evening fell over the open fields, the group decided to call an end to the day's rigorous exercises. Telawea gave strict instructions for him to refrain from any further exertion tonight, ensuring his body could thoroughly absorb the benefits of the day's training. Later that evening, he soaked in the mansion's opulent, cavernous bathhouse, overwhelmed with gratitude for such luxury. Upon stepping out, Elru greeted him warmly, explaining that since she was responsible for the household's meals, she would ensure he was properly fed to fuel his recovery. Sitting down before a magnificent feast, Cross hesitated, questioning if he truly deserved to eat such lavish food free of charge. Elru and Rion urged him on, emphasizing that nutritious meals were an essential part of becoming stronger, secretly improving one's physical condition beyond what standard status parameters showed. Relenting to his hunger, he dug into the meal with ravenous enthusiasm. Every bite exploded with incredible flavor, filling him with an overwhelming sense of bliss and contentment. Having completely polished off the massive feast, he lay slumped against the table with a heavily bloated stomach, utterly satisfied and immobile. Suddenly, the click of boots signaled someone approaching the table. Elru stepped into view and casually announced that it was time for her specific branch of instruction to begin. To his absolute shock, she instructed him to remove his clothes and lie face down. Inside the quiet room, Cross sat on the edge of the bed with his heart pounding, nervously asking Ludmilla if he really needed to strip down and lie flat. She calmly clarified her instructions, assuring him that his underwear could stay on as long as he got into position. He let out a startled yelp the moment her hands made contact, squirming in sheer embarrassment as the unexpected physical proximity sent his head spinning. As he lay face down, she positioned herself over him to apply a special lotion, massaging his back while explaining that this treatment would help him recover stamina and stimulate his latent magic. Channeling her own mana directly into his skin, she explained her theory that although his jobless class prevented him from leveling up normally, it granted him the unique flexibility to absorb skills from any discipline through this direct body magic conditioning. She leaned closer to whisper playful encouragement into his ear, teasingly noting that intimate skin-to-skin contact was essential for awakening deeper feelings as he gasped from the intense sensory overload. Dazed and bright red from head to toe, the young boy scrambled out of her quarters, thanking her in a flustered hurry as she gently reminded him to rest well for the upcoming training day. Fleeing back to the safety of his own grand bedroom, he collapsed face first onto the plush mattress, completely exhausted from the night's overwhelming trial. Crawling beneath the warm covers, he resolved to sleep early as instructed, only for a soft pair of arms to suddenly wrap around his chest from behind. Before he could process what was happening, Telawea pulled him tightly against her bust to give him a late-night reward for his hard work, secretly activating her magic drain skill as she held him close. She hovered intimately over him, whispering that draining his magic completely was the key to expanding his overall capacity faster, assuring him that this was all part of optimizing his growth alongside Ludmilla's plan. Cross could only lie there in shock, realizing his mana was actively being siphoned away. Beneath the heavy canopy of the bed, she held him tight, explaining that reducing his total mana reserves would make it far easier for his jobless body to absorb new skills while allowing his stamina to fully recover during deep sleep. As she gently patted his head, a wave of embarrassment washed over the young boy, leading him to wonder if such pampering treatment was simply turning him into a completely spoiled and helpless person. The quiet moment was abruptly shattered when Seal burst into the room in a fury, accusing the Dragonkin of taking advantage of the situation before violently driving her out as arguments erupted among the women in the hallway. Left alone in his bed, Cross sat up dripping with cold sweat, trying to process the chaotic scene while questioning if it was truly acceptable for his training under elite adventurers to be so bizarrely lenient. Taking the instruction outdoors the next day, Seal sparred with him under the open sky, asking if he had assumed that training under S-class adventurers would be ruthlessly harsh and unforgiving. She went on to explain her philosophy, noting that any instructor who imposed extreme hardship without evaluating their pupils' actual capacity was merely a third-rate teacher, emphasizing that true growth required proper understanding. Encouraging the young warrior, she assured him there was no need to rush, agreeing that while overcoming the limitations of the jobless class required immense effort, steady daily discipline would allow him to measure and break through his own boundaries. 3 days passed in dedicated practice, with him gradually finding his rhythm during their drills as she praised his swift progress and improving form outside the estate. Locked in a focused exchange of strikes, Both master and student shared a confident smile, their mutual trust deepening as his training progressed smoothly. Having guided her young charge, she watched attentively as Cross gasped in sudden realization, feeling an unfamiliar spark of energy awakening inside him, as her words echoed in his mind, urging him to grasp the true feeling of magic. He channeled that raw sensation into his wooden sword, preparing to swing with everything he had. With a fierce shout, the boy unleashed a powerful magic-infused slash that split the air, leaving the surrounding companions in awe before Telawea excitedly demanded to inspect his status plate. Presenting the glowing tablet, he revealed that although his base statistics remained strictly at 0, four brand new skills had appeared, including 3 passive compensation abilities and the active attack technique Clear Cut. Seeing the results, the seasoned party members celebrated his success, explaining that Clear Cut was an exceptional skill that concentrated magical energy directly into a weapon to drastically amplify its offensive power. While they cheered over his acquisition of 3 passive stat-boosting skills at once, he listened intently, trying to fathom how much his combat potential had just shifted. Expanding on the discovery, they clarified that compensation skills directly increased numerical stats, a vital boon for a jobless individual, and speculated that his unique class might allow him to learn baseline skills from every existing profession. Although Rion pointed out that small compensation boosts could not entirely fix a 0-stat foundation, Cross gripped his wooden blade and realized with amazement that his swing speed and physical strength had already improved dramatically. Lowering his head in deep humility, he expressed heartfelt thanks to everyone who had supported him, genuinely grateful for even a modest 5-point enhancement to his stats. However, just as the moment of celebration reached its peak, a soft voice interjected, hinting that the true secret of his potential was only beginning to unfold. Telawea clasped Cross's hands warmly, acknowledging that acquiring 4 skills simultaneously was the direct reward for his relentless efforts before their training even began. As she squeezed his hands gently, she reassured him that his dedication was truly impressive. She then vigorously ruffled his hair with a broad grin, declaring that while the team was incredible, he was equally fantastic, leaving the young boy completely flustered and blushing. Shifting to a more serious tone, she cautioned him that compensation skills only grew incrementally, meaning he could not grow complacent and needed to focus on strengthening his actual combat abilities through a real battle. He hesitated in silent panic, realizing he had never even defeated a simple horned rabbit in combat before. She cheerfully insisted that building confidence required facing and defeating actual monsters, oblivious to the sheer dread on his face. While she briefly stepped away, Cross tried to bolster his own courage alongside Rion, reasoning that even if his only training was striking an unresisting target, he might manage to handle a weak creature. His faint hopes were shattered instantly when Telawea returned carrying a massive, towering snake monster on her shoulders, casually announcing she found a suitable opponent near the forest entrance. The looming beast was a Snake Eyes Type 2, designated as a Risk Level 1 threat, yet its intimidating size caused the young swordsman to tremble uncontrollably. As the giant serpent slithered into striking position before him, Cross cried out in utter desperation, reminding his mentor that she had promised not to be overly harsh on him. Facing the bizarre, multi-eyed serpent creature, Cross panicked at the sudden jump and danger. Though Telawea insisted he was strong enough to handle it, the disorienting sight of the monster's gaze caused his consciousness to flicker and fade. Before he could regain his senses, the monster's thick, spotted coils constricted tightly around his body, squeezing the air from his lungs as a cry of agony escaped his throat. Trapped within the suffocating grip, he heard Telawea call out a warning from a distance, explaining that these snake eyes used the dizzying array of pupils along their hides to paralyze their prey before crushing them. Coughing violently as he managed to break free from the coils, the young fighter gritted his teeth, desperately searching for a way out until he noticed the distinct movement pattern of the beast's many eyes. He barely recoiled in time as the serpent struck again with ferocious speed, acknowledging that even knowing its weakness, its lightning-fast maneuvers left him almost no room to breathe. Determined not to be overwhelmed, he steeled his resolve and locked his gaze onto the approaching monster, focusing every ounce of concentration on a move he knew he could execute. Tracking the counterclockwise rotation of the creature's revolving eyes, he braced his stance and began channeling his martial energy directly into his sword arm. With a single, explosive stroke, he unleashed his clear-cut skill, severing the giant monster into cleanly sliced fragments before it could even complete its leap. Panting heavily as the remains of the beast collapsed onto the grass, he leaned against his sword to catch his breath, while Telawea and Seal shouted praise for his triumphant feat. He stood astonished by his own victory, gazing down at his hands in disbelief. Telawea commended his performance, pointing out that while the creature possessed formidable power, its weaknesses were plain to see once exposed. The rest of the companions chimed in with warm praise, reassuring him that it had been a fine test run, while he marveled at how examining his status plate had revealed the names of every skill he had ever learned. He and his companions then retreated to the comfort of the estate under a bright, open sky, eager to rest after their successful trial. Once inside, he excitedly recounted to his instructor how he had tested his abilities against dangerous monsters, finding the swift improvement almost dreamlike. Ludmilla listened with a gentle smile, encouraging his enthusiasm and presenting a warm, aromatic beverage to celebrate his progress prior to his scheduled recovery massage. As he examined the steaming cup with curiosity, she explained that the brew was a rare medicinal wine, crafted from secret recipes shared between humans and elves. She assured him that the mixture would enhance his magical capacity and status growth, helping him build the strength needed for future battles. With his energy renewed, he returned to the training grounds where Telawea plunged him back into demanding combat drills. She ordered him to execute his slicing technique 100 times without faltering, stressing the need to synchronize his magical flow with every blade movement. While he diligently practiced his swings in the courtyard, Seal and Rion watched from the side, observing how much his confidence had grown since overcoming the monstrous creature. They agreed that defeating such a tough opponent had given him a newfound sense of self-assurance. As he continued his relentless training in the background, Telawea commented on the local bullies from his past, prompting Rion to recall the leader of the orphanage, a child prodigy endowed with 10 initial skills and a rare warrior class. Watching him wield his sword with unwavering intent, Telawea recognized his genuine potential to become a high-ranking adventurer, knowing that overcoming his past would fuel his inner strength. Halting his repetitive drills, she strode over and challenged him to an immediate sparring match, commanding him to unleash his full power without worrying about draining his magic. Fueled by her spirited challenge, he charged forward into the duel practice with complete resolve, taking his first bold steps toward mastering his abilities alongside his steadfast companions. He stared in astonishment at the document in his hands while his companions leaned in close to peer over his shoulder. The girls crowded around, their eyes wide with intense curiosity as they examined the freshly updated record. The status plate revealed a remarkable array of compensation and support abilities, detailing progress in skills like clear cut, emergency evasion, body hardening, and magic manipulation despite all base stats remaining at 0. Impressed that someone with the jobless class could reach level 3 in clear cut within just 3 days, Telawea marveled at his growth before excitedly urging him to set some clear, motivating short-term goals for his training. As he stammered in hesitation, Telawea assured him that no one would laugh, pressing further by asking if his goal involved defeating a legendary monster or getting revenge on someone who had wronged him. When he blurted out his desire to prepare for a reinstatement exam, Elru and Telawea reacted with genuine surprise at the unexpected modesty of his immediate objective. He went on to explain that attending the Adventurers Academy had always been his dream, admitting how surreal it felt to receive personal instruction from such elite figures while still holding onto that long-cherished ambition. His mind drifted back 4 years prior, recalling the nightmarish terror when fierce monsters invaded his birthplace, leaving a young boy helpless amidst blood-chilling screams and total devastation. In that dark hour, the hero Alicia descended like the wind, cleaving through the monstrous horde with legendary strength and single-handedly saving the village from utter destruction. Observing his solemn expression, Elru softly surmised that he wished to become an adventurer capable of protecting others, just as the hero Alicia had protected him back then. Flustered and embarrassed by the lofty comparison, the boy frantically waved his hands in denial, asserting that someone like him could never dream of standing alongside such a legendary figure. While Elru watched his humble reaction with fond affection, he sat silently while his companions debated their next move, with Rion raising a cautious concern that the academy appeared to be populated almost entirely by young women. Because of this, Telawea found the idea rather intriguing, while Rion nervously backpedaled on her suggestion, worried it might come across as disrespectful. Dismissing those doubts, the Dragonkin warrior passionately declared that he should take the reinstatement exam, pointing out that facing diverse opponents was crucial to avoid developing flawed combat habits from only sparring with them. With a mischievous smile, she hinted at an even better plan and ushered him outside toward the academy, ignoring Rion's persistent attempts to intervene. As they made their way, she suddenly turned to inform him that he would need to learn a specialized new skill before taking the test. Her expression twisted into a confident grin as she promised him a secret weapon that would guarantee his success. A short while later, he stood before the massive iron gates of the academy, a wave of nervous apprehension washing over him as he took in the scale of the facility. Noticing his hesitation, his companions offered warm encouragement, telling him to hold his head high after all the hard training he had endured. As he trotted through the courtyard toward the designated hall, Telawea watched from behind with a knowing smile, remarking that a standard approach wouldn't suffice for this particular test. Reaching the threshold of the examination room, he placed his hand on the heavy door and swallowed his anxiety, reminding himself of every lesson his mentors had taught him. As he stepped out onto the arena floor, the deafening roar of a packed stadium washed over him, catching him entirely off guard. The spectators in the stands immediately recognized him as the infamous jobless youth expelled during the awarding ceremony, muttering in disbelief at his brazen audacity. From the center of the ring, he looked up in shock, wondering why a supposedly private reinstatement exam had been turned into a massive public spectacle. A tense voice cut through the noise as a figure stepped into view before him, demanding to know what crazy stunt he was trying to pull. The challenger was none other than Seal, her eyes wide with rage as she rested her heavy sword on her shoulder, utterly incensed that a jobless dropout had returned after just 1 month, and had personally selected her as his official exam opponent. Realizing he had been set up, he screamed out Rion's name in pure panic, looking up toward the observer balcony where Rion and her companions watched on. High above, Rion smiled calmly, having secretly handled all the paperwork to pit him against his former teammate so he could reclaim his stolen self-esteem, while down below, Seal roared in a fury, promising to beat him to a pulp so he would never dream of becoming an adventurer again. Seal taunted Cross with a cruel smirk, telling the 0-point boy to hurry up and disappear because he was merely standing in the way of their training. As she berated him, she kicked him mercilessly, shouting that someone as weak as him could never become a real adventurer. Clutches his wooden sword with trembling hands, he could only endure her harsh insults while the official announcement for the reinstatement contest rang out across the grounds. With the contest officially underway in the arena, she stood proudly before him, eager to demonstrate the overwhelming difference in their combat capabilities while the surrounding crowd looked on. Unyielding, she immediately unleashed her powerful sword skill, mow down, driving her weapon downward with terrifying velocity. Instinctively reacting, he braced himself and activated body hardening, minor, just in time, screaming in agony as the blow struck. The devastating strike shattered the stone floor upon impact, kicking up a massive plume of dust and shockwaves that completely engulfed the ring. As the thick smoke slowly began to clear, shocked murmurs spread throughout the audience, with many assuming the raw violence of her attack had fatally crushed him. From the elevated spectator gallery, the veteran instructors and party members observed the trial, commenting on the brutal mismatch of pitting a classless youth against a high-tier opponent just a month after class assignments. Yet, much to her utter astonishment, he stumbled out from the haze groaning in pain, bruised but distinctly alive. Realizing he had somehow stacked various defensive techniques in the heat of the moment, her irritation only intensified. Refusing to let him survive her onslaught, She instantly buffed herself with physical enhancement, minor, and charged back into the fray with twisted lunge, aiming to shatter his defenses completely. Her relentless assault continued without pause. But as her blade tore through the air, the young boy found himself unexpectedly calm, realizing the terror he had felt moments ago was rapidly fading. Recalling the impact from earlier, he realized her powerful blow had dealt far less damage than expected, proving that his layered defensive maneuvers were working. Narrowing his eyes, he locked his gaze onto her incoming form, his senses sharpening as time seemed to slow down around him. Drawing upon the combat insights he had observed from seasoned fighters, he read her movement pattern before her strike could fully unfold. Immediately activating his physical enhancement skill in short bursts, he threw off her rhythm, causing her to curse at his repetitive tricks while he strategically decided to alternate his speed to remain unpredictable. With a light chuckle, he slipped effortlessly past her heavy sword stroke, leaving her wide open and thoroughly astonished. Enraged by his evasiveness, she screamed in fury and unleashed a devastating sweeping slash that shattered the arena floor in a cloud of dust and debris. Bursting through the dust, he countered with the swift sword skill clear cut, catching her completely off guard as she reeled back, stunned that a zero-stat opponent possessed offensive capabilities and such fluid speed. Among the onlookers, the audience and instructors gasped in utter disbelief at seeing a top contender forced onto the defensive against the supposedly talentless boy, while Telawea merely smiled with quiet satisfaction. Seamlessly following up his counterattack, he swept his blade in a graceful arc, firmly seizing control of the match as his opponent struggled to recover her stance. He gasped for air, his muscles aching as he struggled to maintain his stance against his relentless opponent. Realizing that his current strikes were nowhere near strong enough to deliver a decisive blow, his thoughts raced toward a dangerous alternative, executing an extra skill. Memory brought him back to Telawea's rigorous instruction, where she had explained how combining several fundamental skills could forge a devastating X skill. She had warned him that when stat differences were immense, raw power alone was necessary to break through, and that this unique technique grew stronger against formidable foes, guaranteeing a hit if executed properly. Returning to the present, his gaze locked onto Seal, whose eyes burned with murderous intent as she prepared to close the distance. Consumed by fury, the young woman leapt through the air with her weapon raised, screaming threats as she amplified her body with high-level physical enhancement. As she plunged downward with a lethal strike, Cross held firm, remembering the core lesson of the extra skill. It demanded unwavering guts and the resolve to dive straight into an opponent's killing blow without hesitation. Steeling his resolve against her incoming aura, he channeled the same fearless instinct that had driven him to face monsters in the past. In a flash of rapid movement, he chained emergency evasion and clear cut in a tight, synchronized loop, weaving through the assault. Meeting her blow head-on at the ultimate moment, he unleashed the low-class extra skill, Cross Counter, driving his wooden blade directly into her opening. The sheer force of the counter shockwave hurled her backward through the air, leaving the spectating crowd and Rion in stunned silence. She crashed violently onto the arena floor and skidded across the dirt, lying motionless as her weapon clattered to the ground beside her. As she lay motionless in the dirt, Telawea rested her chin on her hand with an amused smirk, thoroughly satisfied with the dramatic climax of the fight. Moments later, an official announcement boomed across the entire arena, proclaiming that Cross Elgart had successfully passed the reinstatement exam. He stood frozen in place, sword in hand, barely able to fathom his own victory. Overcome with pure ecstatic joy, he thrust his arms into the air and shouted at the top of his lungs, realizing he could finally return to school. On the ground nearby, his defeated opponent growled in bitter humiliation, refusing to accept that she had been bested by a supposedly jobless novice. Hearing the commotion, panic quickly spread among the spectators as they screamed for a healer, with some voicing disbelief and claiming he must have used some form of cheat. He sweated nervously under the barrage of accusations while medics hurried to the fallen fighter's side. After the chaos settled, his companions congratulated him warmly on his spectacular win, reassuring him that all of his tireless effort had finally paid off. Continuing down the concourse, Telawea urged him to bring out his status plate, explaining that intense battles often trigger a sudden surge in stats and skills. He smiled, expressing heartfelt gratitude to everyone who had guided him along the way. Taking her advice, he handed his status tablet over to Telawea while the others leaned in close to catch a glimpse. Upon reading the updated figures, her jaw dropped in utter astonishment as she gasped at the impossible numbers displayed. The status plate confirmed extraordinary development. While his character level remained at 0, his skill masteries and stat compensations had skyrocketed across the board, with new high-tier techniques like cross-counter officially recorded. Looking closer at the listed competencies, his compensation modifiers had leaped significantly, demonstrating that the sheer intensity of the duel had drastically refined his core abilities. Exchanging a wide-eyed look over the glowing tablet, both he and Telawea remained frozen in stunned silence, completely overwhelmed by the absurd magnitude of his growth. He trotted ahead with light, energetic steps, completely oblivious to the utter bewilderment he had left behind. Watching his retreating back, the women could scarcely process what they had just witnessed on his status plate, quietly marveling at how wildly his abilities were surging despite his level remaining unchanged. As they made their way along the stone path toward the magnificent city and its towering citadel, his spirits soared even higher. Unable to contain his delight over his unprecedented growth, he leaped triumphantly into the air, while his companions could only gaze up at the sky in lingering astonishment. Waving goodbye with a cheerful smile, Cross sprinted off toward the academy, leaving the estate grounds behind. Ludmilla watched him depart, exchanging brief greetings with the companions gathered near the entrance. Walking up to the group, she was welcomed back by Rion, to whom she explained that she had gone to check on Cross during his outing, remarking that he probably would have benefited more from training under Rion's guidance. Hearing this exchange, Seal teasingly questioned if her social energy was already drained, but Telawea interrupted with sheer disbelief, revealing that the boy had actually passed the entrance examination and was now an official student at the Adventurers Academy. The unexpected news left them baffled, with the group pointing out how notoriously difficult the test was known to be, insisting it should have been impossible for a youngster like him to pass, prompting the elf instructor to quietly bring up the crux of the matter. To clear the air, she pulled out a written copy of Cross's status plate and presented it to her companions, asking them to carefully examine his recorded stats and share their honest evaluations. Etched upon the plate was a shocking list of high-level skills and massive attribute compensations, revealing an absurd growth rate far exceeding anything a novice should possess. Staring in disbelief at the unbelievable figures, Telawea confronted the instructor, recalling a past incident regarding a female elf's magical training and demanding to know the truth behind the boy's monstrous growth rate, leaving the elf stammering in nervous hesitation. Incensed beyond reason by the revelation, the dragonkin unleashed a catastrophic flame spell directly at her, roaring in fury as a massive burst of hellfire erupted instantly. The tremendous impact obliterated the landscape, sending a massive plume of smoke and fire towering into the sky while enraged shouts echoed across the scorched hillside. She wailed in despair over the roast livestock her own outburst had vaporized, before turning her fury back onto the elf instructor, demanding to know if forbidden artifacts from Dragonair or the church had been secretly used on the boy. Before the accused could fully defend herself, the young hero chimed in with intense heat, arguing that employing such powerful treasures at this stage would be entirely improper and corrupting to his development. The fiery debate raged on as accusations flew back and forth across the scorched room, with the elf maintaining that any true secret treasure would have triggered an even more monstrous transformation than what they were currently witnessing. As the loud bickering finally began to subside, the quiet spellcaster broke her silence, softly acknowledging that the entire situation was undeniably bizarre. Seizing upon this calm observation, the hero pressed her for an honest assessment, pointing out that as the mentor who had taken the youth under her wing, her direct perspective carried the most weight. Outside the balcony, a quiet stillness settled over the grand estate grounds, contrasting sharply with the overwhelming absurdity of the facts they were attempting to rationalize. Sitting together to review his progress, they noted that after 2 full weeks of skill proficiency training, a normal individual would typically gain only a single level. whereas his development rivaled that of high nobility or elite combat classes. Upon hearing her mentor express genuine pity for how painfully slow normal humans improved, the hero could only stare in utter disbelief at such completely distorted expectations. Glancing once more at the boy's portrait stamped upon his status plate, one undeniable truth remained above all else. He was a complete statistical anomaly. Far from the secluded estate, the grand towers of Almeria Royal Adventure School rose sharply against the sky, standing ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Inside a grand lecture hall, the instructor explained the nature of unique skills, noting that while most are innate, rare cases awaken after birth due to extreme circumstances, magic, or near-death experiences. Sitting amidst his fellow classmates, Cross cheerfully took diligent notes, eager to absorb as much knowledge as possible. He reasoned that combining theoretical knowledge from class with practical mock battles against various peers would make Rion's lessons much easier to comprehend. Glancing to the side, his cheerful expression evaporated as he caught Giselle glaring menacingly at him, clearly still harboring intense anger over their past encounter. Soon after, the class moved outdoors to the training grounds, where the instructor instructed everyone to find partners with similar classes for mock battle training. Hoping to find a sparring partner, he approached a nearby classmate, but the student nervously apologized and fled, terrified of getting involved. High above, the school bell chimed across the campus grounds as the outdoor session continued. Dismayed, he realized that everyone was shunning him out of fear of angering Giselle, frustrating his plan to gain valuable combat experience against a variety of opponents. Gathering his courage, he turned to address Giselle directly to resolve their lingering grievance, only to be met with an intimidating, rage-filled scowl that instantly cut him off. Surrounding students panicked at his boldness, desperately pleading with him not to provoke her further as the tension on the field reached a boiling point. He stood stammering in confusion as the group surrounded him, completely bewildered by their sudden, intense scrutiny. Caught off guard, he could only stare wide-eyed as Ludmilla produced a specialized metallic device, sparking immediate curiosity among the onlookers. Ludmilla held up the intricate mirror-like artifact, explaining that it was a high-grade magic tool typically reserved for wealthy merchants, capable of uncovering hidden information about any subject. Peering closely into the reflective surface of the appraisal lens, the companions gathered tightly around to re-examine his true attributes. At first glance, the numerical values for basic combat power and magical output remained bizarrely displayed as flat zeros. As a dark, mysterious aura swirled across the glass, the girls gasped in utter disbelief at what was beginning to surface. Bypassing the false surface reads of a level 0 jobless youth, the true record exposed an astounding array of powerful passive skill compensations and advanced martial talents hidden beneath. Studying the unveiled document with sharp concern, Elru questioned whether an advanced skill concealment was actively masking his actual potential. Ludmilla pointed out that this went far beyond simple concealment. A high-tier appraisal skill had clearly been cast on him previously, raising troubling questions about who would target him with such sophisticated magic. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, she strictly instructed everyone to keep these findings absolute secret, even from Cross himself, while she quietly conducted a deeper investigation into the anomaly. While she had cautioned the group to keep Cross's true abilities hidden, concern lingered about his presence at the academy, where skilled instructors and seasoned adventurers could easily uncover the truth. Meanwhile, excited murmurs echoed through the school corridors as students caught sight of an extraordinary figure walking past. Spotting the unexpected visitor in the hallway, he gasped in surprise and asked what brought her there. Striking a confident posture with a composed smile, the legendary hero's descendant, Alicia Lafagalian, greeted the young boy directly. Unable to contain his astonishment, he called out her name in disbelief. Standing tall before him, the formidable warrior maintained a calm, resolute gaze, her sudden arrival casting an intense air of tension across the corridor. She stood regal and breathtaking in the arched corridor, surrounded by whispers of awe as onlookers instantly recognized her as the famed descendant of the hero. Nearby, the young novice walked alongside his companions, oblivious to her presence until she suddenly parted the crowd and marched directly toward them. Closing the distance, she locked eyes with the boy, her gaze filled with an intense, tearful emotion that left him and the surrounding students utterly flabbergasted. Gently taking his hands in hers, she confessed her overwhelming relief, explaining how deeply she had worried after hearing no word from the S-class adventurers, only to recently discover that someone matching his description had passed their reinstatement exam. He blushed furiously, completely overwhelmed as tears spilled down her cheeks, prompting bewildered chatter throughout the hallway as students questioned why the legendary hero was weeping over an unclassed novice. Sensing the growing crowd staring at their emotional reunion, she leaned in close to him and whispered that they were attracting far too much attention. Before anyone could react, she scooped him up and leapt away with extraordinary speed, vanishing into the air in a swift gust of wind while stunned onlookers gossiped about her elite commander class status. Meanwhile, back in the hallway, the wild young warrior pumped her fist with newfound motivation, declaring her intention to make a grand name for herself so she too could win over a highborn beauty. Outside, the imposing structures of the academy stood peaceful under the clear sky, harboring deep histories and the intriguing connection between the legendary line of heroes and the mysterious boy. In a quiet arched hallway, Cross stammered out his gratitude, confessing that she had actually saved him long before this day. Flush-faced and flustered, he explained that her heroic deed back then had inspired him to become an adventurer, leaving him as the one truly indebted to her. Connecting the pieces from her memories, she recalled how he had risked everything to save her in the past, even when others told him to leave it to the professionals. Seeing the earnest boy standing before her now, her usual stoic composure softened into a gentle smile. Offering both an apology and her sincere gratitude, she leaned in closer and offered to fulfill any request he might have as a gesture of her appreciation. Panic seized him as he hastily tried to downplay his involvement, offering to pass her thanks along to the high-ranking adventurers who trained him. Yet, remembering their strict warning to keep their hidden training a complete secret, he quickly bit his tongue and backtracked. Dismissing his deflection, she countered that leaving things unresolved like that would give her no peace of mind, insistence lacing her calm voice. Her intense, unblinking gaze pinned him in place, causing his mind to race frantically as he panicked over what a mere novice could possibly ask of the legendary hero. Gathering his courage, he admitted his current predicament, explaining that he had upset a young girl from the orphanage and was at a total loss on how to make proper amends. Pondering the problem, she suggested that offering a delicious treat might be the best way to earn forgiveness, prompting him to realize that bringing sweets to the young girl would be a perfect peace offering. Before he could even process the idea, she enthusiastically declared that they should go shopping for sweets together immediately, catching him completely off guard. Though he protested frantically about the commotion another public outing would cause, she swept his concerns aside, instructing him to wait at the church square while she went to change into disguise. She arrived quietly at the bustling church square, appearing behind the waiting boy and startling him with a playful apology for her delay. Dressed in a charming hooded coat that functioned as a magical disguise, she explained to him that no one would recognize her in this outfit, allowing them to slip past her guards for a secret outing. Leaning closer with a gentle smile, she softly declared that this trip would remain their shared secret, causing his face to flush bright red as he struggled to keep his composure amidst his racing heart. Together, the pair set off through the lively market streets, browsing various vendor stalls as she marveled at the vibrant sights and smells around them. They sampled various treats along the way, purchasing bags of sweets for the children as they thoroughly enjoyed exploring the bustling shops together. Seeing her bright, radiant smile fill the moment, he couldn't help but look at her in awe, mesmerized by her genuine happiness. Later, while taking a brief rest on a bench overlooking the scenic square, she asked if he went shopping often, to which he admitted that his limited funds rarely allowed for such outings. Reflecting on their afternoon, she shared how much fun she had walking through town freely, explaining that while her training took her to many cities, she had never experienced a relaxed trip like this before. Surprised yet touched, he felt relieved that a simple outing could bring her such joy, wondering if this was truly enough to thank her for everything. Gathering his courage, he took the opportunity to ask if she would tell him tales of her past heroics, the monsters she had faced, and the vast world she had seen on her journeys. He leaned forward in eager anticipation as she hesitated, questioning whether a simple recollection would even satisfy his curiosity. She conceded that she could briefly summarize a past encounter, though she doubted her experiences were truly worth hearing. Settling back against the wooden bench under the open sky, the legendary heroine began to search her memories for a fitting tale, recalling her perilous expedition into the treacherous Beckoning Valley. In her memory, she remembered carving a path through hordes of fierce monsters, standing resolute against monstrous reptilian beasts that swarmed the valley floor. Upon hearing her brief account, the boy burst into ecstatic praise, declaring how incredible it was that she had rescued countless lives. She quickly waved her hands in modest embarrassment, flustered by his intense admiration and insisting she had done nothing deserving of such grand acclaim. Curious about her inner strength, he pressed further, asking how she found the courage to face such terrifying monstrosities without giving in to fear. Her answer was remarkably candid, admitting that she was indeed terrified during those moments, which was precisely why she pushed herself to train relentlessly. Turning her gaze toward him with steady conviction, she offered a profound truth, reminding him that honest effort and unwavering hard work would never betray a person. Smiling softly at his amazed reaction, she observed how unusual he was to be so moved by her past battles. Yet she pointed out that despite his level 0 status, his brave intervention against the Hydra to save her made him a truly exceptional individual. Overcome by her unexpected praise, he squeaked in complete astonishment and tumbled back in surprise, thoroughly unprepared for such words from the world's greatest hero. Humbled and flustered, the young novice stammered that his actions were only possible thanks to the support of everyone around him, wondering why someone of her stature would speak so highly of him. Closing the distance between them, she leaned close with a warm, sincere radiance in her eyes, assuring him directly that his brave rescue in that desperate moment was undeniably cool, leaving his heart racing in breathless shock. Flustered by her sudden closeness, he stumbled over his words, stammering out his immense gratitude for everything that had happened that day, as she gently turned to head back. Before leaving, she handed over a box of sweets, advising him on how to handle a certain ill-tempered child and asking him to let her know how the treats turned out. As she blended into the bustling crowd, reflecting that she had failed to properly apologize or thank him, he could only watch her departing back with wide, awestruck eyes. Meanwhile, across town, the grand stone towers of the Almeria Royal Adventure School stood tall under the clear afternoon sky. Inside a quiet lounge reserved for students, an unexpected delivery arrived, prompting curious chatter among the gathering group about who could be receiving a package from Hayino Moon. A young messenger stepped forward with a box and a letter, explaining to Giselle that the gift had been sent specifically from Cross. But the gesture had the opposite effect, exploding into an immediate outburst of fury that shattered the calm atmosphere of the room. Standing amidst the wreckage, Giselle flew into a violent rage, screaming at the others not to touch the offerings and accusing Cross of going out of his way to mock her. Her face twisted with pure venom, furious that a jobless nobody had disgraced her reputation when she was supposed to be the respected leader of the orphanage faction. Her eye flared with murderous intent, her final vow echoing with absolute malice that she would utterly butcher him for what he had done. She aggressively barked out an inquiry regarding the status of their preparations, prompting her associate to nervously report that he had tentatively reserved a selection of viable quests. Continuing his update, he noted that weak animals in the western forests had recently dwindled, speculating that a dangerous threat, perhaps a risk level 3 lesser demon, had strayed into the region and was causing destruction. A malevolent smile crossed her face at the realization of such convenient timing. Should an overly ambitious novice happen to suffer a fatal fate out there, the blame would fall entirely upon the rogue beast, completely unbeknownst to the boy returning outside. Driven by a sudden memory of intense combat, Cross gasped as the phantom strike of a flashing blade cut through his thoughts. He threw himself relentlessly into physical training, swinging his weapon with heavy, exhausted breath until Giselle paused to question his sudden spike in motivation. He kept his silence regarding his true motives, prompting her to suggest that it was an ideal time to adjust their training routine. As the companions regrouped, Alicia announced a shift in their duties, declaring that she would personally handle mock combat, while leaving specialized skill training to Ludmilla and Ptolomea, news that left the boy utterly stunned while Giselle teased them. Taking charge of his magical instruction, Ludmilla explained the fundamental mechanics of magic, describing it as the integration of inner body mana with the surrounding world, before deciding to begin his lessons with basic wind magic. Without hesitation, she physically engulfed the young apprentice in a swirling aura of elemental energy to directly imprint the sensation of wind magic into his body, sparking protest from the onlookers who accused her of taking advantage of the situation. 2 days later, he channeled his energy and unleashed a powerful burst of magic, shouting his chant as a violent gust obliterated his target, leaving him thrilled by his first successful cast of attack magic. Though impressed by his quick progress, Ludmilla offered a stern reminder that while magic provides strong tactical advantages against formidable foes, its lengthy chanting and post-cast delay leave a caster vulnerable. She instructed him to prioritize battlefield awareness and foresight above all else, to which he enthusiastically agreed, eager to master every lesson offered to him. When his companions later examined his official status card, they were baffled to find that despite his level 0 jobless title, his record boasted an absurd list of passive compensations and newly acquired magic skills that defied normal logic. His status card left his mentors utterly astonished as they reviewed the rapid accumulation of high-level abilities listed upon it. They noted that he had mastered both physical defense techniques and wind attribute magic in just 2 short days, a rate of growth that far exceeded any normal human capacity. As they discussed the situation further, they recalled that top-tier appraisal reports had been ordered and would arrive within a few days. They wondered what startling truths might be uncovered regarding the boy's true potential once those official documents were delivered. Despite displaying such incredible feats of mastery, the official record still listed him as a level 0 jobless, an absurd contradiction that puzzled everyone involved. Meanwhile, out in the vibrant city, Cross reflected gratefully on how exceptional his instructors were, crediting their guidance for his newly awakened talents in mana manipulation and wind casting. Walking through the bustling streets, he marveled at his own rapid progress, realizing he was inexplicably acquiring skills belonging to swordsmen, wizards, and monks alike, despite having been completely powerless just days before. Equipping a brand new training sword at his hip, his initial excitement quickly faltered as he remembered the state of his personal finances. His savings were completely depleted. Driven by necessity, he made his way to the Adventurers Guild, staring up at the massive notice board in hopes of finding a lucrative contract for a beginner. The board was filled with various notices detailing rising market prices for monster meat, regional monster shortages, and urgent calls for parties to venture beyond the city gates. His optimism vanished upon realizing that paying quests required venturing outside of town, an excursion restricted strictly to parties of 5 or more, a requirement he could not fulfill since he did not even have a single training partner. Just as despair settled in, his friends from the orphanage called out to him. Aaron approached, asking why Cross was standing there groaning with his arms crossed. When Cross explained he was looking for a quest, Aaron shifted the topic to ask if Cross had successfully delivered the snack to Giselle, reacting with shocked envy when Cross confirmed that she had loved it. He listened in surprise as his old acquaintance invited him to team up for quests, reassuring him that Giselle had already forgiven him for their earlier sweets incident. Upon realizing they were already a group of 4, his eyes widened at the incredible timing, as his addition would complete the required 5-person party. Deep down, he quietly thanked Alicia, realizing her sweet gift had played a crucial role in calming Giselle's hot temper and paving the way for this moment. Setting off into the western forest, the party established their tactical formation, with the apprentice knight taking the lead while he stayed close to protect the rear spellcasters. As they marched forward, the vanguard emphasized the necessity of their ranger for scouting and reminded everyone that their water mage served as their primary trump card against strong beasts. Following them further off the beaten path, he raised a concern about venturing so deep into the woods, noticing how far they had strayed from the designated trail. The leader quickly brushed off his worries, assuring the party that their ranger's presence guaranteed safety against any low-threat monsters they might encounter. Looking deeper into the shadows of the dense canopy, the party agreed to push further inward, convinced that the standard paths yielded no rewarding encounters. Reaching a quiet clearing, he surveyed the surrounding landscape with confusion, unable to detect a single sign of wild beasts or monsters. Before he could question the situation further, the leader turned to apologize, revealing that their true objective in this remote location had nothing to do with hunting monsters. He stumbled back in utter disbelief as Giselle drew her blade and charged directly at him, shouting his name with fierce malice while he struggled to comprehend why his former companion had suddenly turned hostile. Giselle explained that she had orchestrated this entire outing specifically to break him, mocking his naive assumption that he was qualified for this life, while he listened in bewildered horror at the trap set before him. She vented her deep-seated rage, revealing that losing to an unregistered zero-level candidate during the public exam had humiliated her and tarnished her reputation, driving her to eliminate him to protect her pride. Spurred on by her venomous words, the rest of the party ambushed him in unison, striking hard and forcing him onto the defensive as he grunted under the relentless barrage from those he had trusted. Her furor only intensified as she screamed that the condescending gazes of others poisoned her mind, swearing she would never allow her identity as an adventurer to be tarnished by losing to someone like him. Recognizing his agility, the attackers coordinated a multi-elemental magic chant, channeling spiritual forces of water and light to weave an inescapable offensive network around him. A massive deluge of spell fire erupted as a water cannon unleashed its fury, blasting him backward with crushing impact and throwing him into complete disarray. Drenched and battered by the magical wave, he swiftly activated a minor physical enhancement to execute an emergency evasion, tumbling across the rough terrain as the threat escalated. Refusing to let his journey end before it truly began, he recalled the support of those who believed in him and forced himself back to his feet with burning conviction. Before he could brace for counterattack, his pursuers combined their voices once more, gathering the surrounding currents into a razor-sharp gale prepared to strike him down. He retaliated with a sudden burst of elemental force, releasing a spell called Wind Shot that erupted in a violent gust, blowing his former party members off their feet and stunning Giselle with his unexpected magical proficiency. Surprised by his sudden display of power, the hostile adventurers reeled in disbelief that a jobless youth could harness magic skills. Unfazed by their shock, the young boy began chanting an incantation, commanding the voluminous air to gather and answer his call. Sensing the impending threat, the surrounding fighters panicked as their coordination completely collapsed, desperate to stop him before he could complete the spell. With a sharp cry, he released the accumulated pressure, sending a dense blast of wind tearing across the clearing. But to his utter astonishment, the powerful gust ground to a sudden halt mid-air, levitating harmlessly before him. The fierce girl across from him smirked at his bewilderment, leaving him to demand how she could possibly manipulate magic in such an unnatural way. Before he could make sense of what was happening, she surged forward with an aggressive shout, unleashing her counter-strike. The sudden disruption hit him hard, forcing a painful groan as he stumbled backward, struggling to comprehend the strange force suppressing his attack. Smiling triumphantly while gathering a glowing orb of magical energy in her palm, she revealed her unique skill, Lovely Magic, mocking him for not being aware of her true capability. Realizing her power allowed her to seize another mage's initiative and steal their spellcraft, he protested against such an unfair advantage. She merely taunted him further, daring him to shoot again now that his confidence had been shattered in this deadlock. Standing tall near the giant tree, the fierce fighter asked if the 0-point boy was finally ready to concede defeat. Cornered and left with no other choice, he gritted his teeth and began reciting the wind incantation once more, determined to break through her defense no matter the cost. He shouted his spell chant with desperate resolve, pouring everything into the magic even as Giselle mocked him, dismissing his effort as completely useless. Instead of targeting her directly, he unleashed the wind shot at the ground, detonating a massive cloud of dust that caught his opponent completely off guard. Shielded by the dense smoke, he bolted into the cover of the surrounding forest. Refusing to let panic spread, Giselle barked orders to her allies, warning them that their target was attempting to pick them off individually despite his inferior physical capabilities. Confident in her group's familiarity with the terrain, she directed them to split up and form an encirclement to cut off all avenues of escape. Urging Aaron to track down any sign of the boy, she hardened her resolve, fully aware that failing to capture him could result in their expulsion. Before the tracker could concentrate on his skill, a sudden, inexplicable sensation caused him to gasp in shock. The sound of snapping branches and cracking earth filled the air, freezing the entire squad in stunned confusion. A violent shockwave tore through the trees, shattering the peaceful woods with immense destructive force. As the dust settled, a massive swath of the forest lay pulverized, completely altering the landscape in an instant. Surveying the overturned earth and shredded trees, Giselle scrambled toward her fallen squadmates, calling out to ensure they were still alive amidst the sudden devastation. Her breath hitched as a colossal, stone-armored monster emerged from the wreckage, its immense aura confirming it as the true source of the forest's strange disturbances. Realizing the mortal danger, she shouted at the remaining conscious recruit to grab the injured Aaron and Corey and flee into the safety of the thick woods immediately. As her teammates scrambled away in pure panic, she watched them go with a faint, resolute smirk, knowing they might just make it if she provided a distraction. The beast unleashed a deafening roar that shook the clearing, but the young warrior gripped her blade tight, determined to hold the line all by herself. Within seconds, the creature charged forward, pulverizing the ground beneath its weight and sending her crashing violently against the terrain. Blood dripped down her forehead as she struggled to push herself up, cursing her unresponsive legs as exhaustion rapidly took hold. Collapsing back onto the dirt, a desperate realization washed over her that no matter what she tried, someone was bound to be sacrificed today. Yet a fierce grin broke across her bruised face. If buying a little extra time with her battered body meant protecting the others, she was ready to pay that price. From the shadow of the nearby trees, Cross watched the fleeing recruits run past in terror, his eyes widening in utter disbelief as he took in the horrific scene before him. As he watched from afar, the wounded warrior's fading consciousness drifted back to a memory of her little brother declaring his dream to become an adventurer. In those brighter days, she had patted the boy's head with a gentle smile, encouraging him to pursue his ambition with everything he had. But that innocent promise had been shattered on a battlefield, leaving her weeping over his lifeless body as he apologized for failing to fulfill their dream. Returning to her grim reality beneath the monster's looming shadow, she cursed her helplessness, frustrated that Cross's reckless spirit had dragged those painful memories back to the surface. Knowing the younger orphans back in town relied entirely on her leadership, she refused to let her death jeopardize their fragile future. With a ferocious roar of defiance, she forced her battered body upright, determined to leave a lasting scar upon the beast's hide before she fell. Driven by desperation, she threw herself into a reckless assault, accepting that this tragic struggle was the ultimate fate of a street thug trying to protect her own. Tears and blood streamed down her face as she poured every ounce of her soul into a final, heartbreaking battle cry. The behemoth brought down its colossal, armored limb to crush her, meeting her desperate strike with overwhelming power. Yet before the fatal blow could land, a desperate shout shattered the air as Cross dropped from above, blade flashing to intercept the giant's lethal strike. He hurled himself forward without a second thought, intercepting the massive, scaled behemoth midair. Giselle could only watch in stunned silence as the boy put himself directly between her and certain death. As the monster's armor crumbled from the violent impact, he immediately turned toward her, shouting frantically to ask if she was all right. She stared up at him, her wide eyes filled with a surge of utter disbelief. Giselle stepped forward despite her bleeding wounds, dagger drawn as she confronted the terrifying behemoth ahead. Behind her, the young boy stared in disbelief, stunned that she was placing herself in harm's way while ordering him to run as far as his legs could carry him. Unable to fathom her sudden act of selflessness, he shouted back, demanding to know why she was protecting him after trying to crush him just moments prior. She snapped back with fierce intensity, yelling that now was hardly the time to debate her motives. As their frantic exchange echoed through the clearing, the massive rock lizard warrior loomed ominously over them. He grimly noted that although his previous wind shot had blinded the beast and driven it into a cliff face, the monster had taken virtually no damage at all. Looking up at the colossal creature, he recognized the utter despair of their situation. In a standard raid, a balanced team would divide responsibilities among vanguards, ranged attackers, and healers, but this titan ignored conventional tactics entirely, plowing forward with suicidal aggression. Despite her own dread, the battered girl screamed at him to take advantage of the distraction and flee before they were both wiped out. Instead of turning back, he drew his sword and stood firmly at her side, his knees trembling with fear, yet resolute in his choice to fight. Standing shoulder to shoulder with her, memories of the remarkable figures who had guided his path flooded his mind. He recalled the strength and nobility of the heroes he looked up to, swearing to himself that a true adventurer always reaches out to save someone in a pinch. Deep down, he understood that if he abandoned her to save his own skin, he would never be able to face those mentors again. The people who had welcomed him and believed in his potential deserved better than a coward. Before he could reflect any further on his resolve, the beast unleashed a bone-chilling roar and charged forward at terrifying speed. The girl yelled at him to read its movements, but his mind was already set. He simply could not turn his back on her. Gathering every shred of bravery, he threw himself directly into the beast's path with split-second precision. Aiming right at the root of its neck where the thick, boulder-like scales were thinnest, he staked his very life on a decisive blow. Cross-counter. He hurled himself forward without hesitation, putting everything behind a desperate strike against the armored beast. Though he connected with the monster's hide, the sheer impact sent shockwaves rippling across the rocky ground. Skidding across the rough stone, he was forced onto his knees, gasping for breath as he stared at his nicked blade against the creature's impenetrable scales. Watching from a distance, Giselle analyzed the dire mismatch, recognizing that while he possessed the agility to dodge, he lacked the sheer stopping power required to pierce such famously thick defense in head-on combat. Yet before she could intervene, she was stunned by another sudden surge of magic as he charged right back into the danger zone, rapidly chanting a spell to weaken his target. Recalling Ludmilla's vital lesson about low-tier magic, he remembered that the guard-out spell had a short range and fast cast time, making it perfect for breaking defenses in close-quarters combat. With the beast's outer defense temporarily dispelled, he channeled all his energy into a single counterstrike, thrusting his blade directly into the vulnerable point. His strike shattered the creature's thick armor, causing the giant monster to shriek in agony as the power of the technique ripped through its neck. Unable to withstand the critical impact, the colossal rock lizard warrior collapsed with a resounding roar, sending debris flying across the cavern floor. Staring at the defeated behemoth in complete disbelief, Giselle could only gawk, stunned that his reckless gambit had actually brought the giant down. She watched in dismay as the young warrior was hurled across the dirt, his body sliding helplessly against the stone-littered ground. As he lay on the ground, his mind raced to his meager status interface, focusing on the basic skills and low attributes he had to work with. Gasping for breath, he recognized that both his wind shot and guard-out magic were merely at level 1, making it nearly impossible to lower the defenses of a level 4 threat through sheer force alone. Despite the staggering gap in strength, he dragged himself up using his sword for support, fueled by the desire to protect those around him and achieve his goals. Memories of his past weakness resurfaced, reinforcing his vow to never again be a helpless bystander incapable of altering his own fate. The painful remembrance of an injured companion hardened his spirit, turning his lingering doubts into absolute conviction. Lowering his center of gravity, he dug his boots into the dirt and shouted his refusal to back down. Charging headlong toward the giant reptile, he began chanting an incantation, invoking the dark power of twilight as he closed the distance. Reaching the massive monster, he thrust his dark-infused hand forward, screaming the spell name as the weakening magic targeted its thick armor. With its armor compromised, he gathered gale force energy around his blade, finishing his chant to deliver a decisive wind-infused strike. He unleashed the full incantation, channeling his mana into a devastating gale that slammed directly into the armored beast. Without giving his opponent a moment to recover, the young fighter repeatedly cast guard out, systematically stripping away its defensive layers. As the monster hardened its hide to attempt a crushing counterstrike, he executed a swift emergency evasion to slide under its heavy claw. Maintaining his relentless onslaught, he chained one low-level skill into the next, weaving guard out, wind shot, and clear cut into a seamless storm of physical and magical strikes. Watching from the sidelines, Giselle grew increasingly anxious, convinced that such reckless spamming of weak abilities would only drain his stamina for nothing. Ignoring her doubts, the determined boy planted his broadsword firmly into the soil and dropped into a low, agile stance. He drew his secondary blade and lunged directly toward the creature's gaping jaws, determined to make this strike decisive. With absolute focus burning in his eyes, he poured every ounce of his remaining willpower into driving the blade deep into its mark. Refusing to halt, he roared with all his might as the swirling wind around his weapon flared into a roaring vortex, catching Giselle completely off guard. She gasped in utter disbelief upon realizing the truth. His momentum was not fading at all, but compounding exponentially in power with every single skill he unleashed. His true records were being scrutinized far away from the battlefield, within the grand towers of the Royal Adventurers School Elmeria. Inside the dean's office, the gathered women stared in disbelief at the unearthed documents revealing the boy's hidden secrets. Projected clearly upon the desk was his official status sheet, detailing a parameter profile unlike anything they had ever witnessed before. At the center of his record lay a unique skill titled Cinderella Grey, the longing of the have-nots, an ability designed to dramatically boost both learning and mastery speed. The rare trait actively multiplied his growth rate, allowing every repetitive skill cast to compound its effectiveness instantly. Surprised by the disclosure, the instructors debated whether a skill capable of accelerating inherent growth to such a degree could even truly exist. Back in the heat of combat, the boy demonstrated precisely how unheard of his power was, leaping fearlessly against the monstrous rock lizard. With an echoing battle cry, he pushed past his limits as continuous skill notifications flashed around him, fueling his relentless onslaught. A mystery surrounds the strange, unique skill known as Cinderella Grey, an ability that drastically boosts skill acquisition and mastery rates, far beyond anything even experienced instructors had ever encountered. It raised a troubling question. If the boy possessed such an extraordinary gift, why had he been deemed a total failure for so long? Meanwhile, chaos erupted back at the academy grounds as frantic shouts echoed across the courtyard. Word had spread that a terrifying Risk Level 4 monster had suddenly surfaced in the Western Forest, a zone meant strictly for novice training. Panic surged through the crowd as onlookers realized two of their own were still trapped deep within those dangerous woods. Deep in the forest, the young warrior moved like a blur, unleashing a fierce sequence of physical enhancement and precision blade strikes. Watching him execute swift, seamless maneuvers, his companions stood in utter astonishment as he sliced through incoming threats with relentless speed. Concentrating his magic into his palms, he discharged a concentrated wind shot to stagger his opponent before immediately bracing himself with a reinforced guard skill. His companion watched in awe, amazed by how fluently he combined elemental spells with heavy frontline defense. As the massive armored beast loomed over them, he seamlessly switched between martial techniques, evasive maneuvers, and supportive spells without a single moment of hesitation. To her, it felt as though she were not just watching a single novice fight, but an entire synchronized adventure party packed into one boy. With every clash against the beast's impenetrable hide, a flurry of mental notifications echoed around him in rapid succession. Skill after skill continuously leveled up in the heat of battle as his unique gift absorbed every bit of combat experience. His mental interface flooded with dramatic stat boosts and newly unlocked abilities, elevating his strength, defense, agility, and martial mastery to heights that would take normal adventurers years of grueling training to achieve. He leaned heavily on his weapon, his breath coming in ragged gasps as sweat poured down his face. Despite his exhaustion and bruised body, his eyes burned with fierce determination, leaving his partner speechless at his sheer resilience. Despite all his rapid growth, he gritted his teeth in frustration upon realizing that not a single scratch marked the creature's thick, stony scales. exhausted and running dangerously low on stamina and magic. He wondered how much longer he could hold out against an opponent that seemed entirely indestructible. He cursed under his breath as the colossal monster unleashed a massive surge of destruction, completely overwhelming the battlefield. Before the beast could strike again, Giselle stepped forward and unleashed her magic, reminding him that he was forgetting a crucial tactical advantage. Covered in dirt and battle scars, she declared with fierce determination that her magic possessed the power to disrupt the creature's active skills. Confused by her sudden intervention, the young warrior questioned her plan, only for her to sharply order him to combine his wind magic with her own. Working in tandem, they cast their spells simultaneously, creating a swirling vortex of energy that launched Giselle's weapon straight into the heart of the storm. Channeling every ounce of remaining strength, he leaped high into the air and drove his blade down in a devastating strike, piercing through the monster's weakened armor as Giselle watched in awe. Believing the battle was won, he began to celebrate his successful hit, but she screamed a frantic warning just as the beast's massive form lurched forward again. Before he could react, the enraged creature delivered a brutal counterattack, slamming them both into the earth with overwhelming physical force. The violence of the impact shattered the surrounding terrain, burying the entire area under a dense cloud of dust and flying rock. As the haze slowly cleared, both exhaustedly collapsed onto the shattered ground, battered and barely conscious from the monster's devastating blow. He lay battered on the ground, listening to his companion's desperate, tearful apologies as she wept over past failures, begging for no more lives to be lost in front of her. Despite the crushing weight of fear and the monster's looming shadow, he forced his bruised body back onto its feet, refusing to stay down. Recalling the hero's words that dedicated effort would never betray him, he tightened his grip on his blade and stood firm against the impending doom. Knowing individual attacks were useless, he activated every technique and enhancement at his disposal simultaneously, shocking his wounded ally with his sheer defiance. Channeling every lesson and spell entrusted to him by his mentors, he poured all his remaining magic into a singular, desperate gamble. A massive tempest of elemental mana erupted around him as he recited multiple complex incantations at an impossible speed, leaving his companion wide-eyed in complete disbelief. Watching the dark and holy energies collide around his blade, she realized with awe that he was synthesizing magic skills and dark arts into an unprecedented hybrid technique. Unleashing the newly forged error skill, Aegis Shot, he projected a concentrated beam of magic directly at the creature's armored chest. The miraculous skill forcibly manifested a temporary, fatal weakness on the beast's impenetrable hide, creating a brief window for a critical strike. Putting his entire body into the blow, he plunged his glowing blade straight into the freshly exposed mark with explosive kinetic force. Unleashing his unique ability, the error skill Aegis Shot created a brief, fatal flaw directly inside the monster's reinforced body. Capitalizing on that fleeting vulnerability, a colossal force cleaved through the beast, severing its massive hide with a single catastrophic strike. As the massive creature collapsed onto the shattered earth, she watched in utter shock. Just a month earlier, she had mercilessly bullied this boy, believing him to be an incompetent, useless outcast who would never amount to anything. Her mind raced with memories of his relentless stubbornness, remembering how he refused to abandon his dream despite lacking wealth, prestige, or a recognized combat class. Against all overwhelming odds, he stood upright over the beast's corpse, leaning heavily on his sword as the reality of his improbable victory took hold. He panted violently, his face splattered with grime and blood as he struggled to draw air into his burning lungs. He could barely process that he had actually pulled it off, while his companion remained frozen on the ground, unable to tear her eyes away from the boy who had defied fate. Turning to her with an ecstatic grin, he shouted that they had managed to defeat the monster together. She was internally stunned by how much of the work he had done on his own, wondering how he possessed such immense power. Yet she couldn't help but feel infuriated by how recklessly close he had come to being crushed. She suddenly realized that he was casually holding her hand, prompting her to explode in anger and demand why he was acting so familiar. Apologizing immediately, He let go and slouched into a pouty sulk at her fiery reaction. He stood before the fallen behemoth while his companion panicked, frantically insisting they dismantle the carcass immediately. She warned that the scent of blood would attract surrounding predators unless they harvested the monster's own materials to ward off smaller beasts and secure their escape. Realizing the immediate threat of being swarmed by roaming monsters, the plan became clear. Harvesting the core beast's remains was their best chance to safely exit the dangerous woods. Meanwhile, across the rugged mountain trails, three figures leapt across the terrain at breakneck speed, desperate to reach the battle site. Pushing themselves to the limit, the mentors worried that what was meant to be a simple test had spun completely out of control, fearing the young warrior might already be severely injured. Activating her magic perception to pinpoint their location, the instructor surged forward while her allies frantically debated unleashing high-level spells to clear the forest floor. Moments later, the frantically searching group broke through the tree-line, arriving at the edge of a sunlit clearing. In the center of the field, the exhausted pair rested motionless against the massive shell of the defeated creature. Swarming around them in sheer disbelief, the mentors stared at the giant slain beast before rushing to check on the boy's condition. With a faint, battered smile, he weakly thanked his masters for coming, selflessly asking them to heal his companion first before his strength gave out entirely. Chaos instantly erupted as the mentors berated the girl for pushing him past his limits, while she frantically attempted to force-feed him a potion mouth-to-mouth to revive him. As he lay motionless on the ground, the young tracker standing nearby shuddered in utter terror, realizing that the overwhelming aura of these women made a deadly level 4 monster seem like nothing more than an ant. Murmuring weakly before losing consciousness entirely, the young boy wondered if he had moved a step closer to his masters, while beside him, Giselle also fainted from sheer exhaustion amid the mentor's panicked confusion. Because of his selfless sacrifice, his fading consciousness held fast to his dream of becoming a true hero, one who could appear out of nowhere to save anyone trapped in a hopeless pinch, as silence returned to the vast mountain valley. Shortly thereafter, the group transported the unconscious youths back to the safety of the old mansion standing tall on the estate grounds. Resting quietly in a comfortable bed, he slowly fluttered his eyelids open, letting out a soft moan as clarity returned to his senses. Instantly, the surrounding women crowded around his bedside, their faces beaming with relief and joy as they excitedly called out to check if he felt any lingering pain. Looking around the familiar room, the exhausted boy realized he was safely back in the mansion, overwhelmed with relief that they had survived the ordeal. As peace settled over the estate, his mentors reassured him that Giselle had been fully healed and returned to the orphanage, while a survey team dispatched to the forest confirmed no other dangerous monsters remained. Turning his attention to the bed, Ludmilla pointed toward a small, mysterious creature resting nearby, prompting Alicia to gently chide him for always prioritizing others over his own well-being. He gasped as his eyes adjusted, suddenly realizing the massive, severed head of the rock lizard was resting right beside his bed while his mentors stood nearby. As he stared in shock, Ludmilla and Alicia quietly reviewed the reports, acknowledging that his sudden growth and the manifestation of a rare ability had barely saved him from certain death against a level 4 beast. Overhearing their confirmation, his eyes sparkled with unbridled joy as he shouted in excitement, finally realizing that he had defeated a genuine risk level 4 monster. He went on to explain how Giselle's assistance had been crucial, describing how he applied every lesson his teachers had imparted and how an unfamiliar skill had suddenly awakened within him. Clenching his fists with earnest sincerity, he credited the entire victory to the incredible guidance of his masters, insisting a novice like him could never have survived otherwise. His overwhelming modesty caught his instructors completely off guard. Ludmilla had prepared a stern lecture to keep him grounded, but his pure gratitude left her utterly speechless. Unable to stay strict against such endearing sincerity, the mentors gave up on scolding him, encouraging him to keep up the hard work while he playfully begged for even more praise. Several days passed, and life resumed its routine at the towering gates of the Royal Adventurers School, Almeria. Stepping into the bustling cafeteria, the young boy paused in surprise as he noticed a wave of hushed whispers and sharp glances sweeping through the gathered students. Surrounding students murmured in disbelief, openly questioning whether a supposedly jobless novice could truly have slain a level 4 monster or if the rumors were vastly blown out of proportion. As he called out to her, asking what was happening, the wild girl recoiled in sudden shock, her eyes widening in disbelief as she backed away. Perplexed by her dramatic reaction, the young boy wondered aloud if her injuries were still bothering her or if they simply hadn't made up yet. Deeply flustered, her face flushed red as she wondered internally why he was looking at her like that, unsure of how she ought to respond. Seeing her hesitation, her classmates immediately chimed in to tease her, pointing out that she had been the one insisting on making peace. She defensively snapped back for them to shut up, claiming he had merely caught her off guard. Observing the commotion with a baffled smile, the boy decided it might be best to step back and give her some space for the day. Before he could walk away, however, she squeezed her eyes shut and forced out a nervous, blushing apology for how she had treated him the other day. The unexpected show of remorse caught him completely by surprise, his wide eyes reflecting his astonishment. Taking her lead, the rest of the male students suddenly threw themselves forward in a chorus of dramatic, tearful apologies for having doubted his feat. Overwhelmed by their sudden bowing, he waved his hands modestly, reassuring everyone that as long as they were all safe in the end, he bore no ill will whatsoever. His effortless forgiveness left his peers staring in quiet disbelief, realizing just how exceptionally kind-hearted and gentle their classmate truly was. He was instantly swarmed by eager classmates demanding to know if he had really slain the level 4 monster all by himself. Giselle barked at the crowd to sit down and stop delaying the lecture, demanding if pestering him was more important than making amends, but the students continued to shower him with questions. Outside in the corridor, footsteps clicked along the stone floor as the commotion spilled into the hallway. Whispers traveled fast about the dangerous level 4 beast in the western woods and how a supposedly jobless student had taken it down in record time, while he frantically pleaded for everyone to calm down. Hearing the gossip, she paused as cynical voices scoffed at the idea of a commoner receiving an award after missing a month of academy classes. They insisted that a jobless youth accomplishing such a feat was nothing more than a fabrication, yet a soft, knowing smile spread across her face. Turning away from the doubters, she strolled gracefully down the corridor past other students who openly praised his success. Hearing them wonder if the group had reconciled, she walked on with a light heart, genuinely pleased by his recognition. In the open training courtyard, Cross began reciting dark incantations, gathering swirling winds of twilight magic around his blade while the onlookers observed from a distance. Channeling the compressed aura into a singular focus, he lunged forward and unleashed his technique, shouting the name of the Aegis shot. The explosive thrust struck Rion head-on, sending a powerful shockwave against her as she cried out from the sheer impact. Catching her breath as vapor rose from her body, she marveled at how a mere low-level skill could possess enough raw force to pierce high-grade defenses. Analyzing the lingering residual energy, Catilia broken down the mechanics, explaining how he had cleverly merged warrior techniques with black magic to compress a defense-reducing mist onto a single point. Overflowing with pride, Rion enthusiastically grabbed the boy's face, ruffling his hair and loudly boasting about her disciple's brilliant achievement. Stepping in with a pragmatic perspective, Catilia highlighted the skill's severe flaws, noting its lengthy chant, short range, and abysmal success rate at level 1. Discussing the harsh reality of its 5% accuracy rate, she conceded that despite the practical limitations, a guaranteed one-hit kill remained a formidable asset. Offering her own tactical wisdom, Giselle concluded that simply possessing a hidden trump card grants a combatant composure in battle and forces enemies into cautious, defensive postures. She agreed that while the hybrid technique was inconsistent, it remained a remarkably useful asset. Acknowledging that his instructors were seasoned veterans, the young fighter eagerly accepted their training regimen, determined to refine his foundational skills under their guidance. Following their discussion, the group moved out to the courtyard, where the young warrior immediately resumed practicing his sword swings under their watchful eyes. As they observed his practice, the noblewomen quietly pondered the strange nature of his abilities, admitting they had never encountered an error skill manifesting in a warrior before. A closer look at his status records highlighted their amazement, revealing that his total skill proficiency had surged by over 40 points in a single battle, a dramatic leap attributed to his hidden unique trait, Cinderella Grey. Watching his tireless effort, each of the women harbored her own private ambitions. One resolved to claim him for herself, another praised his unprecedented potential, and the third vowed to use any means necessary to win his devotion. Later that evening inside the estate, he set his empty dish on the table with a light clack, preparing to enjoy a rare moment of quiet relaxation. Before he could settle in, the composed noblewoman took a seat beside him, softly inviting him to spend their upcoming day off together by reading or attending a theatrical performance. Overhearing the proposal, her rival promptly chimed in, asserting that broadening one's cultural knowledge was essential for an adventurer aiming to build mutual understanding with diverse races. Cutting into the conversation, the bold warrior draped herself over his shoulders, enthusiastically arguing that spectating at the gladiator arena was the ultimate way for true fighters to relax while analyzing rival battle styles. Before he could digest their arguments, their lively companion wrapped him in a tight hug from behind, urging a relaxing day of board games at home, while the other women fiercely debated who truly deserved to spend the day with him. He could only watch in stunned silence as the argument reached its boiling point, with Rion demanding a fight over who would claim his time, while Catilia and Giselle readily accepted the challenge, eager to unleash their full power. Before he could intervene, the three women slammed the door shut, deciding to settle the dispute outside through what they casually called light exercise, leaving him alone at the dining table in complete disbelief. Sitting quietly in the sudden stillness of the room, he glanced out the window into the night, waiting to see what would happen. Moments later, rhythmic, heavy explosions rattled the window panes from a distance, signaling the true scale of their clash. The tremors quickly intensified, violent shockwaves shaking the entire house and causing the pottery on the shelves to rattle violently as the fierce duel raged on outside. When the trio finally stumbled back indoors, their attire was shredded and their bodies scuffed, yet none of them had managed to claim victory in their chaotic brawl, leaving them to vent their frustration over the draw. Wiping a bead of nervous sweat from his brow, he quietly pondered if this destructive routine was standard practice for elite adventurers, while the women finally agreed to decide his company for the rest day through a simple lottery instead. By the following morning, the tension had cleared, giving way to the bustling excitement of a massive arena packed with eager spectators. Inside the vast amphitheater gladiatorial hall, thousands gathered in the soaring stone stands to witness the day's high-stakes combat events. Settling into their premium seats overlooking the arena floor, he marveled at the overwhelming size of the audience, eager to see what the day had in store. He beamed with enthusiasm, eagerly joining his companion in high spirits as they settled into their arena seats to enjoy the spectacle ahead. As the arena announcer declared the winner of the semifinals round, the warrior beside him pointed out how observing such matches offered valuable tactical lessons for developing adventurers. Looking down at the arena floor, the young adventurer noted the incoming duelists, a heavily armored level 30 warrior and a level 31 quick flash knight, impressed by their imposing gear. Curious about how she gauged their combat stats, he listened intently as she explained the mechanics of low-level appraisal, a common skill available across classes despite its limitations compared to specialized merchant abilities. Eager to make the spectating experience even more engaging, she playfully proposed a wager on the match's outcome, reassuring him that the stakes would be modest, just drinks and snacks for the winner. Pondering his choice while taking into account his own limited appraisal abilities, the young man hesitated until his companion urged him to place his bet first to keep things fair. Weighing the options, he picked the heavily armored combatant relying on high defense, but she countered with her own analysis, noting that speed and sharp offensive power often decide battles against heavy armor. She went on to detail how heavily armored fighters typically rely on defensive techniques while building toward a single, decisive heavy strike. As the clash commenced, the armored warrior raised his shield to endure incoming blows, waiting for an opening, a defensive strategy that posed a major problem for a fast attacker trying to wear down an opponent with rapid strikes. Suddenly, the agile knight lunged forward with blistering speed, executing a swift countermaneuver designed specifically to break through heavy defenses. He watched intently as a sudden flash of steel split the air, marking the decisive moment of the arena clash. With blinding speed, the quick flash knight darted past his opponent, severing the heavy warrior's defense in a single breath. The massive armor clattered to the stone floor as the heavy warrior collapsed, utterly defeated by the precise counterstrike. The arena roared as the announcer officially proclaimed Pavlov Sorokimin the champion, leaving the young spectator and his companion thoroughly entertained by the spectacle. Leaving their seats, he praised her insightful explanations, admitting that her commentary on intermediate skills and combat tactics made the fight far easier to understand. Excited by the experience, he cheerfully asked if they could go out together again, catching her completely off guard and sending a wave of blush across her face. Flustered by his innocent straightforwardness, she tried to cover her embarrassment by handing him the rest of her warm food, reminding him that she had lost their bet. Away from the cheerful crowds in the stands, a quiet hallway led deep into the shaded waiting quarters reserved for the arena's gladiators. Inside the waiting room, Catilia Richmond offered her formal congratulations to the victor, noting that their house faction's struggle for territorial influence had now officially begun. Seated regally upon her chair, Catilia declared with absolute confidence that House Richmond would be the first to demonstrate their true power and expand their reach. She listened intently as the armored knight inquired about which upcoming competition they ought to enter next to maximize their influence. Pointing toward a notice board filled with announcements, the noblewoman selected a specific event, reasoning that it would perfectly showcase their martial prowess and skill to the widest possible audience. By the following morning, the sun shone brightly over the Grand Academy building as a new day began. Walking down the bustling hallway while fondly reminiscing about the previous day's arena excitement, the young fighter was abruptly confronted by his former rival, who demanded to know if he was in urgent need of money after learning of his situation from an orphan. Caught off guard by her sudden physical proximity, he recoiled in embarrassment before admitting that he had indeed exhausted most of his earnings from the rock lizard warrior on new gear, prompting her to offer him a spot on an upcoming quest. As they walked together, she hastily insisted that the invitation was merely a high-reward quest meant as an apology for their previous clash, even as he questioned whether there was any remaining reason for them to fight each other. Inspecting the quest notice handed to him, he hesitated at the daunting imagery of mountainous terrain, wondering if such an undertaking might prove too demanding for his current abilities. Upon reading the actual headline promoting a fluffy slime suppression contest filled with surprisingly cute creatures, his apprehension instantly vanished, and he eagerly declared his acceptance, while his companion looked on in utter disbelief. High above the northern steppes of Basque in Rubia, the morning sun illuminated the vast plain set to host the day's great suppression contest. Amidst the gathering crowd, Cross marveled at the lively atmosphere, realizing the competition felt far more like a bustling festival than a grim battle. He proudly displayed his updated status card to Rion, revealing that his recent victory over a formidable threat had propelled him directly from an apprentice to a level 20 intermediate ruinous warrior. She could hardly process the astonishing news, marveling at how he had achieved an intermediate rank in under 2 months, even if he modestly downplayed the achievement as merely capitalizing on a weakened foe. As their peers swarmed around him to pry into his secret training regime, the fiery warrior woman grabbed him by the collar and dragged him away from the inquisitive crowd. She fiercely scolded him for risking exposure, reminding him that keeping his tutelage under such dangerous mentors a secret was vital for his own safety. Nearby, Giselle nervously flustered as she insisted her intervention had been purely self-serving, though the young swordsman offered her a heartfelt apology and sincere thanks for covering for him. With a warm, bright smile, he reassured her that he was truly glad she knew, suggesting with a gentle laugh that their shared knowledge would now be their own special secret. Her face flushed crimson at his earnest gaze and radiant grin, leaving her utterly speechlessly flustered as he innocently questioned why her cheeks had turned so bright red. She could only stammer in disbelief, flustered as she pointed out the absurdity of his financial troubles when he was being fed by formidable monsters, though deep down she knew such strange luck was entirely typical for him. Before she could pursue the matter further, a dark cloud gathered along the distant ridge, prompting the surrounding vanguard to turn toward the sudden threat as alarms spread down the line. Down from the clouds descended a massive flock of fluffy slimes. Risk level 2 creatures whose cute, harmless appearance belied their vicious nature during mass migrations. Seeing the horde approach, the gathered combatants raised their weapons and let out a unified battle cry, reaffirming their strategy to hold the front line. Behind the front line, the spellcasters began preparing their incantations in unison, pooling their magical energy to launch a massive combined attack. Spearheading the charge, Cross bounded forward into position while the mages behind him unleashed a flurry of basic elemental spells, shouting out calls for water cannons, wind shots, and fire bullets. Expanding on that initial salvo, a cascade of higher-tier spells erupted over the battlefield, filling the air with roaring flames, surges of silver light, binding storms, and crushing sand. The combined magic crashed directly into the flying swarm, tearing through the airborne ranks with devastating explosive force. Seizing the momentum of the strike, Rion leaped high into the air, swinging her giant blade with a fierce grin as she tore into the surviving monsters and declared the true contest officially underway. Inspired by her fierce assault, Cross and the frontline fighters plunged directly into close combat, hacking through the remaining slimes to rapidly rack up points in the contest. He watched as Rion tore through the front lines with ferocious energy, shouting fiercely as her point total quickly climbed to 5, while surrounding warriors scrambled to claim their own kills. Inspired by her competitive spirit, he refused to be outdone, driving his sword forward into the horde to push his score to 13, while nearby, mages unleashed elemental spells like water cannon and fire bullet to harvest their own points. Despite the initial onslaught from the contestants, the massive horde of slimes showed no signs of stopping, flooding the sky in a dense, chirping wave. Realizing the sheer volume of the incoming creatures, the frontline fighters pulled back into a tight formation, raising their weapons and shields to withstand the impending crash. Combined barges of wind and water magic sliced into the air, yet the swarm's overwhelming momentum remained entirely unbroken, catching the defenders off guard as the creatures breached their magic lines. The violent impact tore through their defenses, scattering dust and forcing the fighters to desperately regroup behind their shields as they acknowledged the unexpected strength of the flying monsters. Before the swarm could completely overwhelm their position, a sudden, colossal blast erupted across the sky, incinerating countless slimes in a single blinding wave of destruction. As the smoke cleared, Catilia laughed with quiet satisfaction, standing triumphant with her staff raised while her fellow contestants stared in absolute disbelief at the devastating power she had just unleashed. He could barely comprehend what he had witnessed, wondering if she had just cast a high-level bombing spell, while she simply wore a confident smirk at his astonishment. She nonchalantly explained that she had deployed a wide-range area skill rather than focusing on raw power, treating the massive devastation as a mere experiment in efficient hunting as her point counter instantly skyrocketed to a staggering 107. She was far from finished, smirking arrogantly as she began incanting another devastating spell to sweep through the battlefield. At her command, a squad of hooded mages behind her stepped forward, unleashing a synchronized battle cry as they prepared to overwhelm the remaining creatures. Chanting in unison, the spellcasters channeled intermediate earth magic, conjuring giant boulders above their heads to launch at the swarm. The massive projectiles rained down upon the battlefield, crushing dozens of slimes simultaneously in a violent shower of debris. Spurred on by the bombardment, other frontline fighters rushed into the fray to finish off the scattered survivors, laughing as they racked up quick kills. Despite the chaotic push from the others, the noble magic user maintained a smug grin as her floating counter surged past 211 points, dwarfing everyone else. Watching from below, Rion cursed under her breath at the blatant display of ostentation, while Cross could barely hide his astonishment before Giselle formally identified the formidable opponent as Lady Catilia Richmond. Though only 16 years old and hailing from a disgraced noble faction, Catilia had already awakened as a dual-element bombing mage, wielding extraordinary growth potential that set her far apart from typical spellcasters. When Rion questioned how she knew so much, Giselle explained that keeping tabs on high-ranking nobles was essential for self-preservation, adding that descendants of legendary heroes often gathered in this town seeking power and strategic alliances. Before they could delve further into noble politics, a fresh surge of slimes roared across the plain, forcing Cross to tighten his grip and focus back on the fight. He listened attentively as a booming announcement echoed across the arena grounds, declaring that the winners of the fluffy slime hunt were about to be revealed. The announcement confirmed Lady Catilia Richmond's party as the overwhelming victors with over 2,600 slimes slain, leaving the surrounding adventurers to whisper about her squad's terrifying magic firepower, while Giselle's team sat at a modest 221. Unfazed by the massive gap in scores, she insisted they remain vigilant and prepare for future quests, pointing out that another opportunity could arise at any time. Breaking down their tactical failures, the seasoned fighter noted how their lack of class synergy and poor coordination allowed the swarm to overwhelm them, proposing a few days of rest before resuming intense group training in their usual spot. Looming menacingly over the young swordsman, she suggested with a predatory smirk that training directly against vicious monsters would yield far better results, prompting a hesitant agreement from him. Nearby, fellow party members quietly gossiped among themselves, questioning whether Giselle's sudden generosity toward Cross stemmed from genuine concern for his skill level or a hidden desire to spend more time around him. Overhearing their baseless rumors, the young warrior froze in awkward embarrassment just before Rion turned with a furious glare, barking a sharp threat that instantly terrified the gossiping adventurers. As the commotion subsided, a luxurious horse-drawn carriage pulled up near the arena gates, drawing his attention toward the departing noblewoman. Looking back over the edge of her decorative folding fan, Lady Catilia cast a subtle, calculating glance directly toward him. He stood silent and bewildered by her lingering gaze as the aristocratic mage casually walked away, leaving him to ponder her mysterious intent amidst the aftermath of the event. As he made his way down the cobbled street with his companions, high above them an aristocratic observer watched from behind a window, asking if this modest band was truly the subject of so much common gossip. Sitting across from her, the heavily armored warrior beside Catilia softly confirmed that these were indeed the figures everyone had been whispering about. She let out a contemptuous chuckle, musing over the unbelievable tales circulating through the city, that an orphan boy without a class and a girl who had sparked controversy at the award ceremony had somehow defeated a formidable rock lizard warrior. The armored nobleman expressed deep doubt, insisting that the boy possessed neither the frame nor the demeanor of a true warrior, suspecting their accomplishments were fabricated cover stories. Catilia burst into a fit of mock laughter at the absurdity of a newly classed commoner vanquishing a threat of that magnitude, prompting her companion to resolve that they should target them first. As their carriage rattled down the street, the Noble Alliance kept their sights set on a larger objective, seizing this pivotal moment to recruit as many useful pawns into their faction as possible. Recalling reports that Giselle possessed a rare and distinct unique skill, Catilia considered her a valuable starting target, coldly deciding that if the young noblewoman refused to submit to their influence, they would utterly ruin her before a rival faction could claim her. High atop the courtyard training grounds, Rion took charge of the session, instructing the younger children to hurl slime-shaped stones at the trainees while urging the group to treat the exercise with absolute seriousness. Eager to participate, the younger children loaded their arms with the stone projectiles, joyfully launching them across the field toward the waiting trainees. Positioned at the center of the arena, the young swordsmen readied their wooden weapons, bracing themselves as the barrage came bouncing into their defense zone. A chaotic rain of stone slimes filled the air, forcing the trainees to react instantly by ducking, parrying, and leaping as the projectiles pelted the ground around them. When a stray projectile threatened one of his teammates, Cross reacted without hesitation, leaping forward to deflect the stone mid-air while another fighter called out its path. Watching his reckless leap from the sidelines, Rion bellowed a fierce reprimand, demanding total situational awareness and prompting a quick, startled apology from him. Despite the harsh scolding he received, a shared sense of camaraderie washed over the young fighters as they stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes burning with determination. Pausing to catch his breath, he He wiped the sweat from his face and let out a bright smile, genuinely enjoying the thrill of training hard with everyone. His moment of quiet satisfaction was abruptly broken by the arrival of Catilia Richmond and Giselle String, whose arrogant demeanor signaled a sharp turn as Catilia openly mocked the commoner's rustic training methods. She offered a snicker of condescension, warning the commoner trainees not to get the wrong idea after their bold claims about defeating a high-risk monster. Surprised and insulted by the accusation, Cross shouted back in protest. But the noblewoman continued unbothered, grandly offering to take the patronless orphans under her wing as her personal subordinates. Gritting her teeth in anger, Rion sharply rejected the patronizing gesture, pointing out her own status as an intermediate adventurer, which prompted Giselle to turn away with a disappointed sigh over the commoner's stubbornness. Fanning herself with cool composure, the noble lady walked away, quietly noting the consequences of refusing her generous patronage while leaving the astonished group behind in disbelief. As the aristocrats departed, Cross naively questioned why the proposal was dismissed so abruptly, only to be barked at by a furious Rion commanding everyone back to their grueling drills. The following morning, the trainees gathered eagerly at the guild hall, ready to select their next contract for the ongoing subjugation contest and prove their worth. Their enthusiasm vanished at the counter when the receptionist calmly announced that the orphan group's rights to accept any guild quests had been officially frozen, sending Rion and Cross into a frenzy of shocked outrage. The guild attendant further explained that a formal grievance had been submitted against them by the Countess of the Richmond family, alleging a grave infraction that barred them from active service. Right on cue, the highborn lady glided into the hall flanked by her entourage, mocking the helpless commoners for daring to think they could ever reject a noble's proposition without severe retaliation. When one of Catilia's guards stepped forward to reprimand the group for their disrespect, Rion snapped right back, harshly dismissing the minion while directing her unbridled rage straight at the noblewoman herself. Having stood her ground, she listened as the noblewoman offered to withdraw the petition with unearned grace. Elaborating on her conditions, the aristocrat demanded that Rion join her group, bow down, and beg, but the fiery warrior saw right through the arrogant trap. Raising her arm in direct challenge, she declared a full duel. If she won, the petition would be cancelled, but if she lost, she would surrender herself completely to the noble's faction. Proposing a 7-on-7 contest to turn the duel into a public spectacle, the noble remained smug while her opponent grinned savagely, eager to shatter her rival's pride. Accepting the challenge with a parting mock, the aristocrat dismissed them as mere commoners attempting to punch above their weight before turning away. As the nobles departed, the young fighter urged his companion to stay calm and talk things through, but she snapped at him in frustration. Later, overlooking the sprawling city, Giselle explained the harsh political reality to Cross, clarifying that the nobles were using them as a stage to showcase their influence. She detailed how Basque Rubia served as a meeting ground for powerful families seeking prospective suitors and prestige through calculated dominance. Elaborating further, she noted that weak noble houses were easily wiped out, making absolute military power the true measure of survival and respect. Revealing the core of the danger, she warned that the noble heirs had finally begun their campaign to expand their reach, making Cross and his group their primary target. She continued detailing the ruthless ambitions of the high nobility, pointing out that seizing control of talented orphans defeated by a classless fighter was an easy way for rival houses to bolster their own military strength. Realizing the true danger they were in, Cross acknowledged that unless they secured a decisive victory in this challenge, the noble factions would never cease their relentless pursuit. Overcome with guilt upon hearing this, Ptolomea burst into tears and apologized profusely, horrified to learn that commoners were treated as nothing more than disposable pawns in noble political games. Turning his mind to battle tactics, Cross analyzed their upcoming 7-on-7 clash, concluding that their only path to victory lay in deflecting Catilia's destructive explosion magic and launching a swift strike against the enemy commander. Reinvigorated by his strategic insight, Rion and her companions cheered enthusiastically, eager to take the fight directly to the haughty aristocracy and clear their names. Meanwhile, outside the massive academy structure, News of the impending high-stakes team battle began to circulate among curious onlookers. Refusing to waste a single moment, Rion grabbed her teammate and aggressively pushed for an intense training regimen focused on maximum speed and disruptive combat techniques. Their chaotic session was suddenly interrupted by an imposing female officer who stepped forward and casually noted that she had overheard their entire conversation regarding Catilia's defensive party formation. She warned them that defeating an intermediate defensive squad built to withstand high-rank monsters was no simple task, even if Giselle managed to disrupt their incoming spells. Locking eyes with Cross, the officer pointed out that his unique ability to wield both swordplay and magic made him the key to victory, urging him to master high-level offensive spells to break the enemy's formation. He gasped as the blonde military officer proposed a radical shift in his development, suggesting that he aimed to become a true magic swordsman. She reminded him that had his spellcasting not been suppressed during the previous mob attack, he could have handled the threat entirely on his own. The concept left the young warrior wide-eyed with wonder as she elaborated on the nature of the path. She explained that a magic swordsman was not a distinct class, but rather a hybrid fighting style achieved by combining rigorous melee training with specialized spellcraft to wield both swordplay and magic simultaneously. Outraged by the sudden interference, Rion barged into the conversation and accused the officer of trying to cheat her way into his training regime. Unfazed, the tactician calmly countered that Rion herself had previously emphasized the absolute necessity of raw firepower in combat. Continuing her critique, the officer brought up their recent encounter with the rock lizard, pointing out that any strike failing to pierce an enemy's defense guaranteed defeat. She noted that relying on unpredictable skills like Aegis shot was a gamble with far too low a chance of success. Rion could only sputter in frustration, unable to refute the flawless logic. With no valid objections left from the group, the officer declared that his upcoming training would prioritize mastering high-powered magic to ensure his long-term survival beyond the impending duel. Before he could even process the decision, the officer named Lyumala seized him and launched them both straight toward the abyssal sea of trees. As he cried out in terror during their rapid airborne trajectory, she casually announced that training would begin immediately in this perilous region known for its dense magic and high-ranking devils. Landing in the foreboding wilderness, Lyumala wore a chillingly confident smile as she began preparing the training site. She cheerfully informed her panicked student that the fierce monsters infesting the forest would serve as his live targets for mastering high-level offensive spells. The group arrived at the edge of the wilderness, stepping into the dense clearing chosen for their training ground. Looking around at the wild landscape, Cross pondered the challenge ahead. Curious about her versatile abilities, he inquired how many elements she could truly command. Holding up a small, mysterious pouch with a knowing smirk, she refused to divulge all her secrets so soon, promising only to reveal her skills step by step. Without another word, she tossed the small bag high into the sky above the forest clearing. With a sudden burst, the pouch detonated in midair, scattering a cloud of magical incense across the surrounding woods. The scent acted as an irresistible beacon, instantly rousing the forest's wild inhabitants. A violent stampede of beasts, ranging from giant serpents to roaring apes, thundered out of the tree-line, charging directly toward the group in a terrifying wave. Stunned by the overwhelming horde, he cried out in disbelief, demanding to know what she had just done. She nonchalantly explained that the pouch contained a rare, top-secret incense crafted to lure monsters, prompting him to question why she would unleash such chaos so flippantly. As the creatures closed the distance, Catilia and Telomia bravely stepped forward to meet the onslaught head-on. Watching the swarm advance, he panicked at the thought of having to fight the entire horde all at once. Before he could prepare his stance, she lunged from behind and wrapped her arms firmly around his torso. Shocked by her sudden physical intimacy, he gasped in surprise as she announced that the training ground was officially ready. Guiding his posture directly with her body, she instructed him to focus his mana and continuously unleash his wind shot technique. Under her close direction, a powerful blast of gale force magic erupted from his hands, sweeping away the advancing creatures in a dramatic gust. She maintained her tight embrace, explaining that immersing his entire body in wind magic while attacking was the most efficient method to elevate his skill and build magic resistance. Meanwhile, watching the intimate display from the sidelines, Rion fumed with jealousy, loudly protesting against her overly affectionate training style. He unleashed blast after blast of wind magic into the charging beast horde, receiving constant praise from Lyumala as she guided his form and urged him to target the enemy's weak points. Through this intense, hands-on guidance, his magical capabilities surged dramatically, rapidly leveling up his manipulation skills and overall combat stats in record time. By the 7th day of their rigorous regime in the Abyssal Forest, their relentless attacks had cleared the immediate area, leaving behind quieted woods shrouded in settling dust. Impressed that he had already wiped out the entire wave of monsters, Rion commended his hard work while Lyumala prepared to toss another pouch of incense to summon more targets. However, as the magical scent dispersed into the canopy, an uncanny stillness fell over the glade, leaving Lyumala and the companions puzzled as to why no beasts were approaching. Moments later, heavy, thunderous footsteps rattled the earth from deep within the treeline, startling the group as they spun around toward the sound. Emerging from the shadows was a colossal, three-headed dog monster known as a Bulbaris, its terrifying aura having driven off all other creatures in the forest. Instinctively reaching for his sidearm in a moment of panic, Cross was immediately barked at by Lyumala to keep his sword sheathed and rely strictly on magic. Promising to step in if danger escalated, Lyumala instructed him to see this as a perfect test of his progress and strike directly at the beast's heads. Stealing his nerves, he sprang into the air to unleash his spell, only for the behemoth to snap its massive, razor-sharp jaws violently toward him. He gasped in panic as the beast moved far too quickly, its massive jaws snapping shut around him in an instant. The giant three-headed hound proceeded to swallow its target whole, leaving Rion and the officer watching in utter disbelief. Panicking, Rion screamed out that the boy had just been devoured, but Lyumala remained composed, her sharp eyes detecting a sudden shift in the beast's movements. Suddenly, a burst of compressed air exploded from within the monster's maw, as a powerful wind shot forced the jaw open and launched the young fighter back out into the open air. Catching his breath after narrowly escaping death, he noted that one head had been successfully blown apart, leaving two more to deal with as he dodged another ferocious swipe. From the sidelines, Lyumala called out tactical advice, instructing him not to stare blindly at its sharp teeth out of fear, but to view the beast as a whole and prioritize evasion if his incantations were too slow. He struggled internally, desperately trying to recall the focus he felt during his battle against the rock lizard warrior. Determined to apply everything he had been taught, he charged straight toward the monster, reciting the chant in his mind to focus his magical power into a lethal projectile. Instead of aiming directly at the beast, he used his wind shot against the ground to propel himself through the air, swirling out of reach, just as Lyumala noted with a smirk that wind magic could be used to outmaneuver heavy foes. Reaching a safe distance, he unleashed a full power blast that completely tore off another head, cheering at his success until he froze in horror at what began happening next. With a sickening hiss, the severed heads instantly regrew, as Lyumala calmly explained that this highly magical beast would continuously regenerate unless all three heads were destroyed simultaneously, leaving him wondering how such a feat was even possible. He gasped for air as the massive monster crashed onto the ground before him, signaling the end of their grueling combat exercise. His mentor stepped forward, commending his performance and declaring that they had done enough for the day. The following day, they ventured deep into the lush East Bascarubia forest, where the tranquil atmosphere left him in utter awe. His mentor revealed she had chosen this secluded spot so they could enjoy some quiet time alone together, causing his heart to skip a beat in surprise. Unrolling a bundle of books she had brought along, she emphasized that true rest was just as crucial to his training as physical combat. Taking one of the volumes, he hesitated before voicing a long-held curiosity, asking about her prestigious High Elven heritage and royalty status. He wondered aloud why someone of her noble stature would sacrifice her place in the sacred Great Forest of Blessings just to mentor a mere human. She admitted plainly that she had indeed abandoned her homeland, gazing into the distance with a mixture of solemnity and resolve. Sensing her heavy mood, he quickly apologized for prying into her personal history. However, she reassured him with a gentle smile, explaining that she chose him as her apprentice because she saw much of her younger self in his earnest struggles. She recalled her own youth as an isolated high elf who was far too rigid, possessing neither friends nor mentors to guide her along the way. Reassuring him with unwavering confidence, she declared that enduring these hardships would only make him stronger than before. Her words struck a chord deep within him, filling him with renewed motivation. Lightening the mood, she instructed him to pick out a book and leave deep philosophical discussions for another time as they sat together on a fallen log. Moments later, the serene quiet of the forest was shattered as powerful shockwaves ripped through the clearings. Channeling his magic once more, he realized that if he couldn't destroy all the monsters' heads with a single direct hit, he needed to manipulate the wind currents to alter his trajectory and strike every target at once. He channeled his magic with full force, unleashing a roaring wind shot that spiraled wildly through the air, curving along the atmospheric currents as he fought to manipulate its trajectory. The violent gust slammed into the massive beast with shattering impact, but the intense physical exertion left him bent over and gasping heavily for air. Watching from nearby, Lyumala offered a calm, encouraging smile, acknowledging just how close he had come to perfecting the technique. The colossal beast collapses to the dirt with a heavy thud, leaving the young warrior panting heavily as he leaps clear. He turns to apologize to his companion for needing her help once more, but she quickly dismisses his worries with a bright smile, assuring him that his efforts were on the right track. Struggling to recover his stamina, he anxiously reminds them that only a few days remain until his decisive duel. Their military instructor steps forward, raising a hand to halt the training and declaring that they have done enough for the day, ordering a return home for rest. Observing his restless energy, she speaks with calm authority, reminding him that regardless of how potent healing magic or potions may be, there is no magical remedy for sheer physical exhaustion. He reluctantly nods in agreement, conceding to her wisdom. She reinforces her point, emphasizing that real strength is cultivated during periods of recovery, and that pushing past burnout will only hinder his growth. As he drags his weary body along behind her, she continues candidly, acknowledging that expecting him to relax completely with the high-stakes duel looming so close would be unrealistic. Arriving outside the grand estate, she turns to him with a subtle, playful smirk, floating the idea of engaging in a lighter, alternative form of training while taking a break from combat. Inside the estate, household items, from floating clothes and boots to flying tea sets, fill the air as she assigns him to complete chores using delicate bursts of wind magic, explaining that this will sharpen his fine control without draining his physical endurance. Straining under the intense mental concentration, he groans while desperately steering floating dishware, terrified of smashing everything to pieces. She simply advises him to stay composed and hold out until dinner time. As twilight sets over the grand manor, her encouraging voice resonates from within, urging him to expand his sensory magic to perceive all objects simultaneously, to which he responds with a focused cry of resolve. He lost control of his delicate wind magic, sending stacks of ceramic plates and heavy books tumbling toward the floor in a chaotic heap. Seeing his disappointment over the shattered dishes, the senior officer reassured him that his magic manipulation had already improved remarkably, praising his effort despite his earnest apologies. Following her orders to rest for the day, the young fighter headed outside into the cool evening air, resolving to handle a few light chores to clear his mind. Using his wind magic to dry and sort the laundry, he found the task far easier than levitating heavy kitchenware, marveling at how practical the exercise felt. His casual practice took a sudden, disastrous turn when floating garments, including delicate undergarments, drifted directly in front of the arriving maid and warrior, leaving them utterly aghast. While the energetic attendant playfully embraced him in teasing delight, the fierce warrior barged forward in a flurry of outrage, completely misinterpreting the floating underwear as a deliberate act. Flustered beyond measure, she demanded an explanation for his seemingly shameless tastes, completely deaf to his desperate pleas that it was all an innocent misunderstanding. Meanwhile, the humiliated warrior hid behind a nearby tree to cover her bright red blush, while the observant tactician watched on with a quiet smile, hoping the young fighter would realize the importance of pacing himself. Moments later, sudden flashes of jagged lightning split the dark, stormy sky, signaling an abrupt shift in atmospheric pressure. Gathered on the open training grounds beneath the storm, his companions reminded him that his formal duel was only 2 days away, declaring that conquering Bulbaris today would complete his battle preparation. He hesitated slightly before seeking advice from the seasoned officer, asking if she thought he was truly capable of improving his spellcasting speed. He explained his predicament. While wind magic enhanced his mobility, the activation time left him vulnerable when trying to move and attack simultaneously. The officer listened intently, noting that his struggle was entirely natural for someone refining their techniques. Offering a solution, she revealed that he did not need a powerful new attack spell, but rather subtle wind manipulation to bridge the gap. She promised to teach him a specialized technique called Graceful Leap, a spell that dealt no direct damage, but offered unparalleled utility in combat to give him the edge he desperately needed. Back on the battlefield, the young warrior squared his shoulders against the towering three-headed beast, determined to put her lessons into practice today. As the ferocious monster growled and kicked up dust, he channeled his mana, readying himself to execute the wind-stepping technique under real combat pressure. With a sudden surge of air currents around his boots, he launched himself skyward using the intermediate wind spell, Graceful Leap. Like a bird taking flight, his body cut through the air in a swift, elegant arc, completely catching the multi-headed creature off guard. The monstrous beast lashed out with a devastating paw strike, shattering the ground below, but the boy was already soaring far above the impact zone. Utilizing the air currents to elevate his position, he easily evaded the crushing blow while maintaining his momentum. As he glided through the air, his mentor's guidance echoed in his mind, reminding him that Graceful Leap was purely designed for speed and positioning rather than offensive power. Understanding its true purpose, he relied on the magical draft to outmaneuver his foe with unprecedented agility. Mid-flight, he executed a sharp vector shift, redirecting his momentum across the gust of wind despite not having solid ground under his feet. The ability to alter his trajectory in midair allowed him to dance right past the monster's snapping jaws. Though it provided only a brief moment of hang time, those precious seconds suspended in the air granted him the critical advantage he required. He landed lightly near the beast, positioning himself right in the heart of the fray. Swooping past the giant heads, he recognized that mastering this brief window of aerial freedom could turn the tide of the entire battle. By outpositioning the monster, a single decisive blow could now settle the outcome. Infiltrating the creature's blind spot right behind its central head, he gathered his energy into his fist. With a determined grin, he realized he was now perfectly placed to strike both remaining heads at the exact same time. As he evades the beast's relentless assault, the true nature of his foe dawns on him. Facing a creature whose 3 heads operate in tandem, scanning, attacking, and healing like a balanced party of sorcerers, rangers, and clerics, the young fighter feels the overwhelming pressure of battling an entire coordinated team single-handedly. Realizing the true intent behind the trial, he connects the dots. This brutal engagement was deliberately tailored to simulate combat against a full adventuring party. Knowing that failure here means he stands no chance in his upcoming duel, he gathers every ounce of his determination and prepares to risk everything on his next move. With a powerful pivot, he releases a massive spiraling tempest of wind magic that drills directly into the monster with deafening force. His momentary triumph turns to shock, however, as a glowing magic circle flares over the monster's severed neck. The 3rd head is actively regenerating mid-battle. Seeing the violent vortex consume the arena, Rion panics and demands to jump in and save him, but Lyumala firmly orders her to hold back as the young swordsman pushes through the agony to deliver one final strike. Monitoring the fight, Lyumala notices a sudden change in his incantation. He is channeling the power of a violent dragon, causing his combat attributes to skyrocket at an astonishing rate. Impressed by his ability to adapt and evolve under extreme duress, an exhilarated expression washes over her face. Gritting his teeth against the overwhelming pressure of his own surging mana, he channels every remaining drop of energy into the spell. A sudden, violent explosion erupts from the monster, sending a blinding flash across the battlefield and prompting Rion to scream his name in horror. While he remained absent from the collective drills, the trainees at the orphanage training grounds pushed themselves through relentless sword practice, barking commands at one another to pick up the pace as steel clashed against wood. Pausing to catch his breath between bouts, one of the fighters questioned Giselle about Cross's continued absence, noting that only 2 days remained before the fateful duel. Considering the advice of their superiors, Rion urged Giselle to concentrate fully on her solo training, assuring her that she was their secret trump card and main fighter while they did everything they could to prepare. Nearby, the other trainees pondered the sheer intensity of the regimen Cross must be enduring to gain power in under a month, worrying that he might simply collapse from exhaustion before the match even began. Suddenly, Cross jogged cheerfully through the archway to greet everyone, only to be instantly reprimanded for his tardiness while the onlookers sighed, noticing he seemed completely unchanged despite his absence. Meanwhile, under a storm-swept sky crackling with lightning, Telomia asked Lyumala if she had anticipated these developments, to which the tactician casually affirmed her confidence. Standing before a towering, felled beast, Lyumala assured her companion that Cross would thrive under her guidance, silently reflecting on how fortunate it was to possess a talent like his. The long-awaited day of the duel finally arrived, as strong gusts of wind swept across the vast, rolling terrain surrounding the arena. Stepping onto the designated grounds, Rion rallied her team, confirming everyone remembered the tactical plan to ensure their victory. Across the open field, both factions assembled in formation, the tension palpable as wind whipped between the opposing ranks. Fierce glares were exchanged across the divide, each combatant sizing up their rivals before the impending clash. Unfurling her decorative fan with a condescending smirk, Catilia mocked the commoners, prompting an intense, murderous glare in response. Ignoring the verbal jabs, Cross reviewed the intelligence Giselle had gathered regarding the main frontline fighters on the opposing side. Among their core vanguard stood Darius Lacrond, a level 32 Annihilation Knight boasting formidable offense and defense, alongside Pavlov Saltman, a level 31 Swift Knight known for his lightning speed. Leading them was Catilia herself, a level 34 double mage of fire and earth, backed by high-level mages and priests. As the staggering level gap set in, an official stepped between the groups to declare the start of the proceedings under Union regulations. The officiant announced that the surrounding forest served as the arena, encircled by high priest barriers where a single unshielded blow could prove fatal. He explained that should a combatant take a lethal hit, a protective enchantment linked to their tarot card would trigger automatically, altering the card's color and eliminating them safely without injury. He stood beside Rion and Giselle, expecting the contest to be a standard leader battle as the referee prepared to declare the format. To their utter astonishment, the officiant threw his arms wide and proclaimed that this match would be an annihilation battle, requiring one side to wipe out the other completely within the time limit. Outraged protests immediately erupted regarding the severe team disparity and strict time limit, yet Catilia merely chuckled behind her fan, thoroughly amused by the guild's decree. Flames of fury erupted within Rion as she realized the noblewoman had manipulated the rules into an annihilation battle simply to abuse her team's overwhelming strength and ensure an easy victory. Unbothered by the harsh accusations, the aristocratic lady feigned innocence, dismissing the complaints as baseless slander while her armored allies looked on with disdain. With the parameters officially set, the referee raised his hands and commanded both parties to move out toward their designated starting locations across the vast woods. As they took their places, the trio reaffirmed their resolve, agreeing that despite the sudden shift in rules, their preparations and unique abilities would still allow them to carry out their strategy. On the other side, Catilia's party members snickered arrogantly among themselves, thoroughly enjoying the dismayed expressions left on their opponents' faces. Darius offered a quiet word of caution to Catilia, reminding her that the classless youth had managed to overcome Giselle and likely possessed a hidden skill that demanded vigilance. Positioned at opposite ends of the dense forest, both teams readied themselves as a deafening horn sounded, officially initiating the battle for survival. He and his companions remained gathered together 300 meters to the northwest, unaware that the opposing scout had already pinpointed their position and reported back to Lady Catilia Richmond. Contemplating whether their clustered formation was sheer foolishness or a deliberate ploy, Catilia raised her staff and unleashed her mid-level bombing spell, Explosion Organza, sending a destructive wave directly toward their location. A deafening roar echoed through the forest as a colossal explosion erupted, prompting Catilia to coolly declare the duel already at an end while her squad observed the rising smoke. She giggled with satisfaction, inwardly boasting about how pleased her brother would be with such a swift and decisive strike. However, her triumph was abruptly cut short when she sensed an unnatural disruption in the air, realizing with sudden unease that her sensory magic was failing to function. Before she could react, her own explosive magic detonated directly on her team's position, revealing that Giselle's robbery magic had successfully redirected the blast while the young warrior surged forward on command. As the dense smoke cleared from the scorched clearing, her subordinates scrambled around her in shock, struggling to comprehend how her devastating spell had been reflected back onto themselves. Disbelief washed over Catilia as she stared wide-eyed at her fallen comrade, unable to grasp how Giselle's string could possess such an impossible innate ability. On the scorched earth, the vanquished healer lay unconscious, his status card sizzling as it turned pitch black to mark his complete elimination. Darius and his remaining ally watched in horror as they confirmed their teammates' elimination, realizing with dread that their party had just lost its only healer at the very start of the battle. He grit his teeth alongside his comrades as Catilia barked furious orders, commanding everyone to drink their potions and assume a close combat formation to overwhelm the enemy despite their hidden magic. Consumed by rage over the counterattack, the noblewoman screamed for her squad to eliminate the arrogant woman immediately, just as her men detected an enemy closing in at incredible speed. Charging forward through the terrain, Cross relished how perfectly Giselle's reflection technique had executed, knowing it was now time to carry out his designated role. Locking his eyes onto the clearing ahead, he spotted the enemy formation clustered among the trees and confirmed he had found his targets. With swift footwork, the young warrior skidded across the ground and repositioned himself above them, moving with quiet precision to set up his strike. Down below, the frontline vanguard held their weapons ready, swirling in defense as they braced for an assault that had yet to land. Perplexed by the sudden pause in the enemy's momentum, the warriors scanned the area, wondering why their opponents hadn't launched an immediate attack. High in the canopy, Cross began incanting a powerful wind spell to summon a dragon-like gust, while Giselle stood calmly beside him and teasingly asked if he was nervous. As he chanted, he recalled Lyumela's tactical advice prior to the duel, reminding him that when facing stronger opponents in a team match, his primary role was to act as their fierce long-range bombardier. With his spell fully charged, he unleashed mid-level wine magic upon the enemy below, as Lyumela watched on with pride for the beloved apprentice she had nurtured so carefully. He unleashed his spell from high above, sending 3 condensed pillars of roaring wind cascading directly down onto the unsuspecting opponents. As the localized tempest detonated upon impact, the gale-force winds shattered the ground and hurled Catilia's squad into the air with violent force. Standing amidst the swirling debris, Catilia whirled around in utter disbelief, unable to fathom how such an overwhelming assault had caught them completely off guard. When the swirling dust finally settled, the battered vanguard lay groaning on the torn earth, their tight formation entirely broken by the single magical barrage. Struggling back to their feet, the knights debated the impossibility of the strike, reasoning that no enemy mage should possess mid-tier wind magic capable of keeping pace with high-speed melee combatants in dense terrain. Realizing the immense threat hidden in the canopy, they decided their only option was to split their forces into 2 groups and hunt down the elusive spellcaster before another volley could be launched. With their target locked onto the forest canopy, Darius and his men charged forward into the dense woods to flush out the sniper. Even as her defenders shouted a final warning to remain vigilant, Catilia froze as a subtle rustle in the nearby foliage signaled an immediate threat closing in behind her. Before she could draw her weapon, an enemy ambusher burst from the shadows with a swift aerial leap, aiming a decisive strike directly at the isolated noblewoman. Just as the blade was about to connect, Darius intercepted the attack with lightning speed, blocking the lethal blow with his massive greatsword and catching the attacker off guard. The long-awaited day of the duel finally arrived, as strong gusts of wind swept across the vast, rolling terrain surrounding the arena. Stepping onto the designated grounds, Rion rallied her team, confirming everyone remembered the tactical plan to ensure their victory. Across the open field, both factions assembled in formation, the tension palpable as wind whipped between the opposing ranks. Fierce glares were exchanged across the divide, each combatant sizing up their rivals before the impending clash. Unfurling her decorative fan with a condescending smirk, Catilia mocked the commoners, prompting an intense, murderous glare in response. Ignoring the verbal jabs, Cross reviewed the intelligence Giselle had gathered regarding the main frontline fighters on the opposing side. Among their core vanguard stood Darius Lacrond, a level 32 Annihilation Knight boasting formidable offense and defense, alongside Pavlov Saltman, a level 31 Swift Knight known for his lightning speed. Leading them was Catilia herself, a level 34 double mage of fire and earth, backed by high-level mages and priests. As the staggering level gap set in, an official stepped between the groups to declare the start of the proceedings under Union regulations. The officiant announced that the surrounding forest served as the arena, encircled by high priest barriers where a single unshielded blow could prove fatal. He explained that should a combatant take a lethal hit, a protective enchantment linked to their tarot card would trigger automatically, altering the card's color and eliminating them safely without injury. He stood beside Rion and Giselle, expecting the contest to be a standard leader battle as the referee prepared to declare the format. To their utter astonishment, the officiant threw his arms wide and proclaimed that this match would be an annihilation battle, requiring one side to wipe out the other completely within the time limit. Outraged protests immediately erupted regarding the severe team disparity and strict time limit, yet Catilia merely chuckled behind her fan, thoroughly amused by the guild's decree. Flames of fury erupted within Rion as she realized the noblewoman had manipulated the rules into an annihilation battle simply to abuse her team's overwhelming strength and ensure an easy victory. Unbothered by the harsh accusations, the aristocratic lady feigned innocence, dismissing the complaints as baseless slander while her armored allies looked on with disdain. With the parameters officially set, the referee raised his hands and commanded both parties to move out toward their designated starting locations across the vast woods. As they took their places, the trio reaffirmed their resolve, agreeing that despite the sudden shift in rules, their preparations and unique abilities would still allow them to carry out their strategy. On the other side, Catilia's party members snickered arrogantly among themselves, thoroughly enjoying the dismayed expressions left on their opponents' faces. Darius offered a quiet word of caution to Catilia, reminding her that the classless youth had managed to overcome Giselle and likely possessed a hidden skill that demanded vigilance. Positioned at opposite ends of the dense forest, both teams readied themselves as a deafening horn sounded, officially initiating the battle for survival. He and his companions remained gathered together 300 meters to the northwest, unaware that the opposing scout had already pinpointed their position and reported back to Lady Catilia Richmond. Contemplating whether their clustered formation was sheer foolishness or a deliberate ploy, Catilia raised her staff and unleashed her mid-level bombing spell, Explosion Organza, sending a destructive wave directly toward their location. A deafening roar echoed through the forest as a colossal explosion erupted, prompting Catilia to coolly declare the duel already at an end while her squad observed the rising smoke. She giggled with satisfaction, inwardly boasting about how pleased her brother would be with such a swift and decisive strike. However, her triumph was abruptly cut short when she sensed an unnatural disruption in the air, realizing with sudden unease that her sensory magic was failing to function. Before she could react, Her own explosive magic detonated directly on her team's position, revealing that Giselle's robbery magic had successfully redirected the blast while the young warrior surged forward on command. As the dense smoke cleared from the scorched clearing, her subordinates scrambled around her in shock, struggling to comprehend how her devastating spell had been reflected back onto themselves. Disbelief washed over Catilia as she stared wide-eyed at her fallen comrade, unable to grasp how Giselle's string could possess such an impossible innate ability. On the scorched earth, the vanquished healer lay unconscious, his status card sizzling as it turned pitch black to mark his complete elimination. Darius and his remaining ally watched in horror as they confirmed their teammates' elimination, realizing with dread that their party had just lost its only healer at the very start of the battle. He grit his teeth alongside his comrades as Catilia barked furious orders, commanding everyone to drink their potions and assume a close combat formation to overwhelm the enemy despite their hidden magic. Consumed by rage over the counterattack, the noblewoman screamed for her squad to eliminate the arrogant woman immediately, just as her men detected an enemy closing in at incredible speed. Charging forward through the terrain, Cross relished how perfectly Giselle's reflection technique had executed, knowing it was now time to carry out his designated role. Locking his eyes onto the clearing ahead, he spotted the enemy formation clustered among the trees and confirmed he had found his targets. With swift footwork, the young warrior skidded across the ground and repositioned himself above them, moving with quiet precision to set up his strike. Down below, the frontline vanguard held their weapons ready, swirling in defense as they braced for an assault that had yet to land. Perplexed by the sudden pause in the enemy's momentum, the warriors scanned the area, wondering why their opponents hadn't launched an immediate attack. High in the canopy, Cross began incanting a powerful wind spell to summon a dragon-like gust, while Giselle stood calmly beside him and teasingly asked if he was nervous. As he chanted, he recalled Lyumela's tactical advice prior to the duel, reminding him that when facing stronger opponents in a team match, his primary role was to act as their fierce long-range bombardier. With his spell fully charged, he unleashed mid-level wind magic upon the enemy below, as Lyumela watched on with pride for the beloved apprentice she had nurtured so carefully. He unleashed his spell from high above, sending 3 condensed pillars of roaring wind cascading directly down onto the unsuspecting opponents. As the localized tempest detonated upon impact, the gale-force winds shattered the ground and hurled Catilia's squad into the air with violent force. Standing amidst the swirling debris, Catilia whirled around in utter disbelief, unable to fathom how such an overwhelming assault had caught them completely off guard. When the swirling dust finally settled, the battered vanguard lay groaning on the torn earth, their tight formation entirely broken by the single magical barrage. Struggling back to their feet, the knights debated the impossibility of the strike, reasoning that no enemy mage should possess mid-tier wind magic capable of keeping pace with high-speed melee combatants in dense terrain. Realizing the immense threat hidden in the canopy, they decided their only option was to split their forces into 2 groups and hunt down the elusive spellcaster before another volley could be launched. With their target locked onto the forest canopy, Darius and his men charged forward into the dense woods to flush out the sniper. Even as her defenders shouted a final warning to remain vigilant, Catilia froze as a subtle rustle in the nearby foliage signaled an immediate threat closing in behind her. Before she could draw her weapon, an enemy ambusher burst from the shadows with a swift aerial leap, aiming a decisive strike directly at the isolated noblewoman. Just as the blade was about to connect, Darius intercepted the attack with lightning speed, blocking the lethal blow with his massive greatsword and catching the attacker off guard.